Moderator has the ability to mute all participants, and if this happens, I'll call on you before you or the no, which is, I believe, the red X, to vote. If this fails, I'll call on the clerk to conduct a recorded vote, and each councillor will be called upon alphabetically to verbally state yay or nay on each item. Regardless of the voting method, I will then state the result of the vote. If at any time you want to speak to a matter, please identify yourself first. And again, that's *6 to mute and unmute, and *9 to raise your hand if you're on a phone. Now Tim is going to do the roll call.
Thank you, Chair Clarke. So we'll do the roll call now. Councillor Armstrong.
Present.
Chair Clarke.
Present.
Councillor Erb.
Present.
Councillor Foxton.
Present.
Councillor Galloway.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
Councillor Jaworski.
Present.
Councillor Jowett.
Here.
Councillor Kiefer.
Present.
Councillor Lorentz.
Here.
Councillor McGarry.
Present.
Councillor Nowak.
Here.
Councillor Shantz.
Here.
Councillor Strickland.
Here.
Chair Redmond.
Here.
And Councillor Rubanovich.
Here.
All are present.
All right. We are now going to start a vote on reconvening into open session. That's moved by Councillor Shantz and seconded by Councillor Redmond. Please use your yes or no buttons to vote. Everybody? All right. That was carried unanimously. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Okay. Seeing none. There are no delegations registered for this meeting. We're on to the consent agenda. Do you want to remove, if you want to remove an item from the consent agenda, please indicate so now, as we will not take questions on consent items unless the items are requested to be removed to the regular agenda. See none? Oh, we do have a question from Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. I was just I had someone comment to me about some of our capital projects in light of COVID, and I just wondered if I could get someone to comment a little bit on how we prioritized our capital projects and the funding versus from capital versus levy. And
you're referring to the construction activity report?
Yeah. Am I ahead of you?
Nope.
Thanks.
Is Thomas or Mike?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll start, and then possibly Phil Bauer or Craig Dyer can jump in. So we really have looked largely at what are we able to do rather than looking specifically at funding. I know we are going through some of the funding, looking at are there things from a development perspective that we can delay, and we do have 4 projects actually that we are currently deferring. One is Cressler Road reconstruction, Coronation Boulevard, which we're delaying largely because we want to make sure we don't impact the Cambridge Hospital, Bridgeport and Caroline, and bus stops in Chicopee. But we will be doing a further review of the financial impacts on the capital program. At this point, though, we are continuing to move forward the immediate projects that we have. So there were some awarded in April. We have, I think it's 4 or 5 projects that we're planning to award next week, but we'll be looking at funding post that. So I'm not sure if Mr. Bauer or Mr. Dyer have anything to add to that.
Could I? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to pick up on Mr. Schmidt's comments, so yes, we're in the process of taking a look at all the projects that were approved in the 2020 capital program. And we hope to bring kind of the results of that review forward, hopefully to the next committee cycle on May 26th.
Okay, could I just ask a supplemental on that? And the multi-use trail on Victoria Street, could you comment a little more specifically on that? That was the one, or one of the ones that they were questioning why that's important at this point in time.
Through you, Madam Chair, the reason we moved forward with Victoria Street is that has been a very long issue. There are no pedestrian facilities or cycling facilities along Victoria Street. Currently, people are essentially walking in a beaten path along much of Victoria Street. So it has been, it's been a long-term issue, and we felt we needed to go ahead and fix it.
Thank you.
I did have one question myself on the micromobility update, probably for Thomas as well. With the pilot, I'm aware that we've had a couple of attempts at this and they haven't been very successful in terms of ridership. With the pilot, are we simply looking at increasing ridership? Is that our only goal? Or are we also looking at all at the demographics of use? And I ask that because I know that one of the limitations of micromobility bike share type projects elsewhere has been that it's used very, by a very limited number of people and primarily wealthier males. And I'm just wondering whether that's going to be a component of our research.
I will ask Mr. Zink to respond, but I would say it's really overall, it's really part of our looking at that concept of first mile and last mile, and how do we get people better connected to the transit system that we have. But I'll let Mr. Zink add the details of that. How do we get
through you, Madam Chair? So to add on to Mr. Smith's comments, we're looking at a more integrated, broader network to deal with first mile, last mile, as well as get into some of the communities and community center areas where we can have greater exposure to trips in those areas, rather than, as the report indicates, we're kind of focused on many of the central area for trips. And I think there's a broader network that we can deal with there.
Okay, thank you. It does, from my research, which I'm sure is much more limited than yours, it does look like there is a little problem just in terms of the limitations of this kind of model being used by all groups. So I would hope that we would have a look at that in our own research.
Yeah, we definitely will look at different ways to provide this type of transportation. I think the real answer is there is not one silver bullet of what we can do to solve all problems for all people. So it really is looking at a number of different ways, micromobility being one, cycling paths, walking pedestrian facilities, all kinds of different ways that we can look at to connect people. And we're going to have to do many of them if we're going to serve the public needs.
Thank you. There are a couple of other questions. Councillor Verbanovich.
Thanks very much, Chair Clarke. Just one quick question for Mr. Schmidt or Mr. Zink. I'm just wondering, and I understand, we would have made this decision around not moving forward this year prior to the last few weeks and what we've all been facing, and with the likelihood that transit ridership may remain lower, at least in the short term. I'm wondering if we've given any further thought about whether we should maybe revisit the decision around even a scaled back system for this year, because more people might be needing it.
Mr. Zink?
We, through you, Madam Chair, we have not given thoughts to a more scaled back system. There's a significant effort to get an integrated system with each area municipality involved. So we haven't spent any time talking about a scaled down version. We've more looked at applying the learnings from the plan, the micromobility plan, with a foresight to trying to implement something in 2021, which is broad. So, you know, rather a recent occurrence, the COVID situation. So we haven't really tried to scale anything down to meet that need.
Do we think there's any merit to at least have a discussion with our partners and see if it's something that should be looked at? Like, I don't know what it would, since for example, Drop Bike was here last year, how much effort it would take to sort of reintroduce it for the balance of this year and still go ahead with the broader program?
Through you, Madam Chair. So Drop Bike was looking at, their proposal was to start in August as part of their setup for this year. So that would leave us a very little utility this cycling season or the active season, I'll call it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, in regards to the micromobility update, and I think further to your question, Councillor Clarke, to Mr. Zink, in regards to the first and last mile aspect of this project, is it anticipated that the service would be part of your monthly pass or your actual GRT fare, whichever one you use? And then is it assumed then that those who are on fare assistance through one or another program would then be able to access this particular program and be able to deal with you know, some of the demographic issues I think that Councillor Clarke has identified?
Through you, Madam Chair, very interesting concept. I think that would prove very beneficial in the future. Logistically, I'm not sure we're there yet to be able to implement something like that, and certainly would meet the integrated approach we're looking for. I don't believe it's called out in the report that we have at this time.
No, it isn't. I'm just wondering if that was even thought of or anticipated, or maybe should be a consideration as we go forward. No, it isn't. I'm just wondering if that.
Through you, Madam Chair, we can certainly spend some time exploring that concept.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see no other questions. A motion to approve items or receive for information, moved by Councillor Nowak, seconded by Councillor McGarry. Start vote. Please use your yes or no buttons. Everybody? And that's carried unanimously. We'll now move to the regular agenda items. Each item has a recommendation. I'll read the report number and ask if there are any questions before calling the vote. Report TES TRS 2005.1 Grand River Transit UPass contract updates. And please note the correspondence received by the Wilfrid Laurier University Graduate Students Association in relation to this report. Any questions? I actually had sorry, Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I noticed sorry.
We can hear you. Oh, no, we can't.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry. I noticed in the report that we've got ongoing talks with Conestoga College. I'm just wondering, is there an update on that, or how's that going?
Mr. Zink, could you respond, please?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. So the information in the report is the most recent we have. We had communications with the college regarding startup in 2020, but the situation regarding UPass and for 2020 is what is in the reports. We're looking to target 2021 if all of the dominoes that are mentioned in the report fall in place.
Okay, thank you. I hope we continue to pursue that, because I think they should be, Conestoga College should be on the same level as the universities in the area, and it's been a long time coming, so I hope that works out. Thank you, Peter.
You're welcome.
Councillor Galloway?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. In regard to the same item and further to Councillor Kiefer's comments, I'm wondering, when we had the discussion on this previously, or some few months back, of course, we were informed, as this report informs us, that it seems like the provincial government is fighting tooth and nail to prevent colleges, or I guess all post-secondary institutions, from putting in these transit fees. And even though they, the association, whatever they call themselves, student association, got a ruling that they could go ahead and do it, the province is appealing it, and there was even a reference in the in today's report that they might, even if they lose, they might appeal it even further. So I'm wondering, I thought that when we had the discussion previously, Chair Redmond was going to, or we were somehow or another going to voice our concern about this to our area MPPs to see why the province, or try to persuade the province from being so adamant about holding the line on that that particular policy. And I'm wondering if Chair Redmond or anybody has any update on that effort, or if staff have any update on that effort.
Chair Redmond?
Thank you, Chair Clarke. To Councillor Galloway's question, it's something I've taken up directly with the government and with the minister. I don't think we've contacted them lately or formally, so happy to send a letter on behalf of council if that's council's wish. I think it continues to be a live issue for an awful lot of municipal governments that provide transit and have large post-secondary institutions in their midst. So happy to do that.
Yeah, I think we should keep up whatever efforts we can to persuade the province from getting out of that particular policy they had. They seem to be pretty intransigent about.
Councillor Foxton?
Thank you. Through the chair, would it be helpful if we had the student unions also send a letter along with ours, and basically stating that this is an advantage for them and it decreases their cost in transportation. This is to assist them, not to harm them. This is not a profit-making thing, but a service that we believe is essential to them.
Through you, Madam Chair, we can, through GRT, contact the student unions and see if they would be willing to send letters as well. So we can do that.
Councillor Jowett?
Can't hear you, Helen.
Sorry. When I sat on Conestoga College Board, we had a bit of an issue between student unions from term to term and their opinion about the UPass. So we might want to find out where this particular student union stands on the UPass idea before we engage them in letter writing, as this was probably going to take a while before we get change anyway.
Chair Redmond?
Thank you, Chair Clarke. Just to add on, I think Councillor Foxton's suggestion is one probably worth pursuing in the near term, but the reality is that all post-secondary education institutions, colleges and universities are facing a decision whether or not they'll continue to be totally online or they will bring student bodies back, and that will have a direct impact on fees and how they go forward with trying to resume normal life. So COVID-19 has thrown a huge curve at all post-secondary education institutions. That will be one of the factors that probably plays into this scenario as we go forward as well.
Thank you, Chair Redmond. I had a couple of questions. I guess rather than a specific question, I'm just wondering if I can get some input from staff or some feedback. The first had to do with the rate of the fare increases. We've been increasing, the pass increases. We've been increasing them by almost 5% annually, and now we're making a correction of 6 or 7%. These seem like big increases to me, and I'm wondering how it happened that we were so far behind what we now consider our target to be. That's one question. And the other is just sort of general comments from staff on the contents of the letter from the Student Association. The letter seems to suggest that there's actually quite low student ridership, or lower than expected. And the letter also suggests that perhaps students would prefer to use the new reduced fares for people living in low income where that's appropriate. Now it seems to me that the fares are still, the passes are still significantly cheaper than that. I'm just wondering what staff's thoughts are about those two things.
Through you, Madam Chair, I can give a start and then pass it on to Peter on why are we looking at the significant increases. I think we started our UPass price probably significantly behind what other universities had their UPass at for various reasons at the time. And part of what we're trying to do is catch that up to what we feel is the actual value being provided by the students. On the letter, I would say that the UPass is used to different amounts by different students. So I would say some students probably get a huge benefit from it. Other students may feel they get very little benefit. They may not use it at all. So I think part of what you're seeing is really that difference in the students at the universities and colleges using the UPass to different extents, some benefiting a lot, some benefiting not as much, but that's a common part of these types of programs where everyone pays a standard fee for access to a service. So I'm not sure, Mr. Zink, if you have anything you want to add.
Just 2 points through you, Madam Chair. In addition to what Mr. Schmidt has to say is, way back when the UPass began, our service levels were not anywhere near what they are today. So the density of service we provided has grown tremendously over the over 10 years that this has been in place. So the quality of service has increased, and the increased cost helps pay for that level of service, as well as the additional ridership. So there's that one point. And regarding the affordable transit program, the letter pointed out an interest in making use of that for some students. Full-time students are not eligible for the ATP program. So I'm sure they weren't aware of that information when they wrote the letter.
And just to follow up, are we able to track individual users of the passes, or do we just know that a pass was used?
So we do know card number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 has traveled from here to here, and the amount that they've traveled and when.
So we are able to, if we choose to, we are able to get a sense of what percentage of the students are using it and with what frequency.
Correct, and that's what we'll be providing to the University Student Association, so they're able to assess it in their own light.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I see no other questions on this item. Moved by Councillor Galloway, seconded by Councillor Clarke. Can we start a recorded vote? Use your yes or no buttons, please.
Question, can the chair actually vote? Got move it, a chair can't move a motion.
No, I don't think so.
Did I say?
Chair
Did I say
Clarke,
myself?
You can't. Yes, you did.
I'd be happy to second it.
I don't know why I did that. It's Councillor Galloway.
So who moved and who seconded it? Elizabeth?
Sorry, I have moved by Councillor Galloway, seconded by Councillor Kiefer. And thank you. And that's carried unanimously. All right, item CORTRY 2042, the 2020 property tax capping program. Was moved by Councillor Strickland, seconded by Councillor Lorentz. Are there any questions on this? I see no questions. Please use a yes or no vote button to vote.
Was there a movement and seconder for this?
Councillor Strickland, seconded by Councillor Lorentz.
Thank you.
Okay. Everybody? That's also carried unanimously. Item CORFSD 2014, Federation of Canadian Municipalities funding proposal. That's moved by Councillor Vrbanovich and seconded by Councillor Foxton. Any questions on this item? Councillor Vrbanovich, do you have a question?
Not a question as much as a quick comment, Chair Clarke. I just want to say, we've been doing a lot of work, Chair Redmond through AMO and myself at FCM, as we advocate for funding for municipalities as we deal with the impacts of COVID-19, both regionally and at the lower tier. I think it's fair to say there's probably a little bit of political hot potato playing going on right now between the two orders of government. The feds are saying, well, municipalities are a creature of the provinces, and provinces are saying, well, it's the federal government that has the ability to print money and has the full horsepower of the Bank of Canada behind them. And I think what's important to remember here is that in reality, in 1867, we didn't have COVID-19, nor did we even have the Spanish flu when the Constitution, the division of powers happened, and it's really going to take all three orders of government working collaboratively together to ensure that we continue to provide the services necessary for Canadians in our communities, and to really start the post COVID recovery. Having cities that potentially aren't able to function at a level that our citizens expect, or regions to function at a level that our citizens expect, will not bode well for Canada, and hence why this particular motion and the work that's being done both by FCM and by AMO is so important.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. I did have one question for staff.
Chair Redmond has her hand up.
Why do I never see her?
I think you got to go down lower on the screen or up higher.
Chair Redmond.
I'm sure your questions are more interesting than mine, Chair Clarke. I just wanted to reiterate that one of the messages that we keep adding to what Councillor Vrbanovich has said is the fact that Municipalities are the closest to the people. We're the ones that can help stimulate the economy. We have infrastructure needs. We have social housing and affordable housing needs that continue to be at the fore. So we continue to carry that message forward that when we're looking at jump-starting the economy when we come out at the other end of COVID, we are the best positioned to partner with senior levels of government, and we will continue to carry that message forward because I think it's true, it's practical, and I think the business community recognizes that as well.
Thank you, Chair. My question for staff has to do just with, there's a bit of an apples and oranges comparison. If I understand the report correctly, this proposal would bring our region about $7.9 million over the course of 6 months. And sorry, is that correct? And we're anticipating losing about 4.8 million per month in user fees. I'm just wondering whether this proposal would be adequate to cover our losses. And I'm seeing a shake of the head from Chair Redmond.
Maybe Craig can kind of walk us through this.
Yep, absolutely. So through you, Madam Chair, maybe the best place to look is the table that we have on page 57 of the addendum agenda. And so that that table indicates that, based on the formula that FCM has put together, the region's share of that funding formula would total just over $79 million. So it's a significant request. A request that is, at this point, in excess of what what we expect our position might be at the end of the year. It has, as you can see, a split between a population based per capita allocation of $7.5 billion, and then an allocation specifically for transit. And I think, thinking back to the previous reports we've put together, I think one of our message has been that municipalities with transit services have been significantly, some might even say disproportionately impacted. So that's why there's that additional funding. And were this funding were to come through, then obviously, there would be decisions to be made by council with respect to how that funding would be used.
Thank you. Councillor Urbanovich.
Yeah, just one other point on that in terms of the proposal as has been presented to the federal government. The thinking is that we're in situations, if we don't end up, needing all of it as operating funds, it would be the initial investment for municipalities to use as capital stimulus programs at the tail end of the pandemic. There's obviously a second phase to this that, as in 2008, would see the federal government focusing on a pandemic infrastructure program going forward. But right now, at least as has been proposed, is that any remaining dollars would simply transfer over for those purposes, and with the same conditions as would exist under the current gas tax.
Thank you. I see no other questions, and Chair Redmond is not waving. Please use your, and we have a mover and a seconder already. Can you please use your yes or no button to vote? All right, that was also carried unanimously. There are no items for information or correspondence. Excuse me 1 second. Where do we have the call for new business? Oh, just right here. Yep. Okay. We're on to other business, and I believe we had a couple of items. Councillor Galloway?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I've got 2 items of other business. They're I think, quite short. I would like to ask staff for a couple of reports. I've talked to both commissioners about this. So the first one is regarding pedestrian priority buttons. We've all been receiving some social media contacts and email contacts regarding that. I've been having that discussion with Mr. Schmidt for probably a year or longer, and there are some real technical implications associated with what some people think is a relatively simple process, although I do personally believe that we've got to move the needle a bit in favor of the pedestrian. But I'd like to ask Mr. Schmidt to have an information report so all members of council and members of the public can understand fully what are the technical implications associated with that, both in regards to the electronics, but also how it might impact traffic patterns in the community. So I don't know if Mr. Schmidt wants to respond to that, but I have asked him for an information report. I would like to ask him for an information report in that regard.
Oh, come on in.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. Yes, we'll prepare a report and answer all the questions. Hopefully, answer all the questions on pedestrian actuated buttons, costs, impacts, programming, all of the many aspects of that question.
Okay. And then the second item that I've asked is for Mr. Regier to bring back, or his staff to bring back a report. So I'm sure most of you have been reading different references, articles, newspaper reports, etc., from planning experts or so-called planning experts. So the likes of Rentadarian, Jennifer Keesmaat, Richard Florida, and others who are predicting that post-COVID, there are opportunities to kind of reimagine how communities are planned. And there may be, in fact, a need for reimagining how communities need to be planned. So I'm wondering if Mr. Regier could, and his staff could put a report together as it might relate to the review of the ROP, of what implications, if any, I'm assuming there will be some post-COVID, that should be considered in our ROP review, or things that we may want to consider within the ROP review, or I suppose outside the ROP review as well. And maybe Mr. Regier has a comment in that regard.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Councillor Galloway. Yes, this is obviously a very active conversation in the planning community right now. We're handling this in two ways. Our staff are taking a look at the implications for the ROP review process, assembling the literature to the extent that it's available. It's obviously a very rapidly evolving field of discussion, and new information is emerging almost on a daily basis, as it is with other aspects of the pandemic. We're also in a preliminary conversation with the University of Waterloo about their observations on the implications. We're planning to bring forward a report updating council on the state of the ROP review in the next month or two. And so what I'd propose is that we include a section on this specifically in that report.
Thank you.
Councillor Jaworski, you had a question or an item?
Yeah, this was for Thomas on Councillor Galloway's first point with respect to the buttons and that. During the winter, we had an email discussion about this, and I believe there was work that the region was doing with lower tier municipalities on pedestrian access along regional roads. And I just wonder if this would be, if you're thinking this would be part of the report that you see coming forward to satisfy Councillor Galloway, or is that a separate longer term discussion that's going on with lower tier municipalities and pedestrians?
I think the discussion we were having was concerning responsibility for sidewalks on regional roads, and that would be a different discussion, I think, than looking at the pedestrian actuated signals.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. Thank you, Thomas.
Councillor Banovich.
Thanks, Chair Clarke. Just on the last 2 points that have been raised by Councillor Galloway, on the first one, I have noted that there are municipalities that where those signal activators exist are using actually a hand-free or motion one as opposed to a touch one. And perhaps that's part of what your report can look at as well, notwithstanding the issue of, should they exist or shouldn't they, which is the broader conversation. But on the second part, I certainly wholeheartedly support where Councillor Galloway is going with this. I mean, as you know, and others know, we've been grappling with the issue even during the pandemic in terms of opening up additional lanes and try to balance that and the need to also send a consistent message around people staying at home. However, as in the coming weeks, as we look to start coming out, I think there is an opportunity for us to look at, particularly now before traffic resumes into more normal patterns, to maybe look at some additional pilots around on regional roads in particular, where we could close some lanes off as they have done in other cities. I know I've asked our staff to look at that from a residential street point of view, to see what kinds of things we can do, like they've done in Oakland and other places, in response to COVID. And I think as we start opening things up again before traffic returns to its normal patterns, that may be the time to look at doing that before people get back into their normal routines and habits going forward. So maybe that could be part of that report. I also have one item that I want to bring up, but I'll wait till after Mr. Murray's and Dr. Wong's report, and it's focused on the issue of data collection and disaggregation of data for data based on race, socioeconomics, and other issues. But I'll speak to that more later on.
Councillor Jowett.
Can't hear you. Can't hear you, Helen.
It's not as sensitive as it should be. Maybe it's because it's got my greasy fingerprint on it. So I'm looking at the homeless problem that we have and the lack of affordable and supportive housing, and then I see a huge advocacy work done by industries and associations, and I know that our chambers of commerce locally, provincially, and federally have done a pretty good job of trying to advocate. I feel the loss of the Social Planning Council right now because going into COVID recovery, I think that our SMEs who hire a significant portion of our community, I think there's a loss there. I hope that at the higher level, we're trying to anticipate just how many people are going to be vulnerable to homelessness now. I heard in the UK that housing prices have fallen. I think it was between 12 and 18%. Maybe we're going to see some of that, and maybe that's going to sort of answer that bubble of our escalating housing prices to maybe balance off some more affordable housing. But are we doing some work there in that regard? Because I do feel like the Social Planning Council probably would have been able to do a good job of this. And then, of course, the people that look after the employment surveys, and I can't remember the name of the group, and I should because Carol Simpson ran it for you, but they could kind of do some surveying to find out just how many businesses are not coming back from this, because I keep hearing stories every day about businesses who are not coming back, and I'm kind of fearful of that.
Sorry.
Yeah, Madam Chair, maybe I could just make a couple of comments. Yeah, I think the affordable housing and homelessness issues are going to be as significant and perhaps more significant as we come out of pandemic. And so what I can say is there's active work going on both fronts. One is looking, working with our community partners to say, what is the shelter system going to look like as we sort of reopen, as we come out of pandemic? And how do we operate shelters in a way that's safe for the staff at the shelters and in a way that's safe for people who are staying at the shelters? So that's a big question. And there's lots of work going on right now. Douglas, Ryan, community partners, shelter operators about, trying to reimagine the shelter system. So that's one piece. The other is, and I might look to Chair Redmond or Councillor Bravanovich, there has been, as federal and provincial governments talk about reconstruction, stimulus, those sorts of things, one of the concepts that's been put on the table is using housing stimulus as a real focal point. And it could serve a whole bunch of purposes, right? You could move quickly. I think there's going to be, as you say, Councillor Jowett, there's going to be capacity in the residential construction sector, I believe. So there's going to be capacity to move. There's a need, and it could move really quickly. So if the federal and provincial governments put money into affordable housing stimulus projects, they could move fast, actually provide a stimulus function, and create significant amounts of new affordable housing. And I think that is on the agenda, with AMO's advocacy with the province, with FCM's advocacy with federal government. I know at sort of senior staff levels between municipal staff and provincial staff, that idea has come up. So I think there's active work going on that front.
And so at some point then, Mike, will we see some information on that and be able to contribute to some of that? I know the governments are making a lot of decisions, even the federal government, they think they're doing a great job of this program for commercial landlords, and only 80% of commercial landlords are interested in that program. The unfortunate part is there's a gap there, and some of the loopholes with which they've put in place have really undermined the sector, So that's only one program that I know about because I was working with it yesterday. But I think we need a stronger advocacy role, and I think that's inclusive of council members. I think we need to start vetting in here because there's so many people who are frustrated at we're coming out with great programs, but there are some gaps that haven't really been vetted by the people that are stuck trying to work with them sometimes. Thank you very much.
Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, I just want to comment on the buttons. If I'm not mistaken, I think the buttons are there to give pedestrians an opportunity to safely cross an intersection. I think probably the biggest problem, if people are concerned about it disrupting the pattern, the flow of traffic, that I think maybe at time of license renewal, they should have to take a patience test. And someone once told me, they said if you don't arrive 10 minutes early, you're late. I think that would be a new mantra for everybody, I think.
Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Clarke. I'm writing down Councillor Armstrong's pearls of wisdom. Just to add to some of Mr. Murray's comments to the concern that Councillor Jowett raised, Best WR, which is the business community that's been animated with both Chambers of Commerce, Communitech, and headed by Tony Lamontief by the Waterloo Economic Development Department, are comrades in arms in this. And I think the more voices we add, the stronger we are. And one of the things that the messages that I keep carrying forward, and you're absolutely right, I think there is a role for all of council to play because it is throughout all of Waterloo region that we need more affordable and social housing. We had about 10 times more responses to our RFP proposition for our social housing partnership. So the more that we can animate agencies and not-for-profits in the community, the more housing will end up at the end of the day. And I was talking to one of the unsuccessful people that applied for that tranche of funding, and the next allocation is probably 2021. So they're anxious to get going. The region sort of gave the go-ahead to some that were shovel ready and others that had a whole lot of work to do. So one of the messages that I keep carrying forward is we have shovel ready. We have ready for prime time. We didn't have enough money to do that. So it's a very quick turnaround to stimulating the local economy and addressing a need that consistently plagues our community. It's something a lot of civil society is turning its attention to and will probably increase, as you say, in the future. So that message continues to be carried forward.
Councillor Urbanovich?
There we go. Thank you. Just following up on that, on the federal piece, this has been a significant piece of conversation that the Big City Mayors Caucus has had with the federal government, including with both Minister McKenna as well as Minister Hussein, recognizing that, as Mr. Murray indicated, things like our shelter system are going to have to look very different coming out of the pandemic than they traditionally have, just because of things like physical distancing and so on, and potentially, I mean, in the shorter term, as Councillor Jowett said, there will be more people that we're going to need to support through affordable housing. So there are a number of opportunities for initiatives that will marry the federal government's priorities with ours, including the updating of units in terms of energy and so on, which obviously speaks to the federal government's greenhouse gas emission targets and so on, while also reducing costs for people. And then the second piece being the broader issue of looking at things, even such as modular units and so on, which I know Z Modular, for example, a local company, has been in that space, and something that the federal government is looking at as a way of quickly being able to either build some new shelter space or some small units that could accommodate people's needs. But as we remind them, it needs to be part of any funding partnership going forward.
Councillor Shantz?
Thank you. Just maybe a little bit similar to Councillor Urbanovic. Through this pandemic, one of the good things that I think is coming out of this is we're looking at certain sectors very specifically, and we're changing how we work with them. And so I guess I'll just say I look forward to seeing what outcomes come out of this in terms of how we support our homeless with using hotels and that kind of thing. I think we've seen different outcomes for people personally and how they are supported. And so I hope we learn from that, and I look forward to seeing how that, how that looks for us going forward.
Councillor Erb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's no question that the COVID situation has forced us to re-examine the homelessness and shelter system. In some respects, it's unfortunate that it has taken something like that for us to see that maybe the system wasn't totally adequate. However, I think we need to work at reimagining how we do things. I know the providers are talking within the region. I think it's all the more reason not to take our eye off the ball. And hopefully the homelessness and affordable housing steering committee that the region has established is going to be able to do some really serious thinking of this and work with our upper levels of government in partnership and do some reports to the region to move this forward. I know there's we're waiting to bring a report from the committee back to council, hopefully in the next 2 or 3 weeks, of how we start moving this forward, and so we have some work ahead of us.
Thank you. There was somebody else's, Councillor McGarry. Just lost the screen for a minute.
Thank you. Just a quick comment on follow-up on the shelter system, and I would agree and concur with a lot of the comments provided right now about reimagining the shelter system. I think here at the municipal levels, we have recognized that, and I think that we'll continue our advocacy at both of our upper levels of government, the provincial and federal level, to ensure that we can reimagine and potentially redesign our shelter system to manage, especially in light of some of the infection control and the isolation and self-distancing that has to occur at times like this that we find ourselves in. And I wanted just to suggest that we have found over the COVID-19 weeks in the past and into the future that we've been able to spread out our population of those that are street involved and that are homeless in other accommodations in order to respect the physical distancing rules that are underway right now. And I think because we've been able to do that, hopefully we'll have that ear of the provincial and federal government members in order to redesign and commit some serious funding for the future in order to redesign a shelter system. Thank you.
The report that we saw in our consent agenda on our homelessness and housing plan talked about the fact that with the COCHI and OFI funding, we expected to be able to build 50 more affordable units between now and 2022, and that number struck me as extremely low. And I think that we all agree that that's grossly inadequate. I'm wondering whether staff can comment on what other opportunities, funding opportunities we may have, and what the actual scope of our new housing development might be in terms of the federal and provincial funding that's coming to us.
Madam Chair, I might start and then ask Douglas or Ryan to comment. So under I think you had both programs, right? Ontario.
COCHI and OFI. I don't know what they stand for.
We'll just go with that. They had multi-year funding commitments, right? So we had a tranche of money that was available to allocate in 2019, I believe, and then I think the next tranche of money that we've got available to allocate, I think, is 2021. So that program, we understand what the next year or two of funding looks like, and it's helpful, but it's not nearly enough. So there's one piece that we know about. And then I go back to what I was saying earlier, that there is active advocacy going on with federal and provincial governments to say, as part of economic recovery stimulus, housing and affordable housing can be a significant part of that. There are shovel-ready projects. It can stimulate the economy quickly. It can solve problems. So that part, I would say right now, is a really big question mark. The other part, we kind of know what's in the bank. But maybe Ryan has more to add. Or Douglas.
Ryan, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Douglas. Thanks, Mike. And through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Mike covered it mostly. Our next COCHI OFI funding that we have up to put out for RFP will be available for construction in 2021, and we have $3.1 million. So as you indicated, that's great. That'll help us build some units, but is essentially woefully inadequate for what we're facing across this community in terms of affordability. Other funding areas or other initiatives that we have on the go for creation of affordable housing, other than what Mike mentioned through the economic stimulus requests that we've made, would be through the master plan that was previously approved for Waterloo Regional Housing. So that'll also begin construction in hopefully late 2021 into 2022 in additional units there that we're applying for the federal government for grants and loans to see that happen. And then other initiatives that we've got going would be through the 10-year Housing and Homeless Plan Steering Committee, things like looking at regional surplus land for distribution to, again, incent creation of more affordable housing. So that's about what we can do with what we have in terms of funding and assets available to us right now. Other than that, it's requests and advocacy to the federal and provincial governments to do even more because we know it's needed.
And if I could just to reinforce the last part, one of the last parts that Ryan said, so I think we've got reports coming up sometime within the next 4 to 8 weeks about proposed pilot for using some surplus regional property for an RFP process to try to incent additional affordable housing construction. So staff are working actively on that, and the Housing and Homelessness Steering Committee has seen that, and that'll be coming forward at some point in the near future.
Thank you. All right, I see no other questions. I'm going to ask Mr. Murray to provide the COVID-19 update at this time.
Yep, and so Madam Chair, I'm just going to ask a really quick question. So I think we sent around that presentation yesterday, so some councillors may have had a chance to flip through it. You know that it's a pretty substantive presentation. So just a question, whether council wants to take a really quick kind of 2-minute stretch break, or whether you want to just dive right into that right now. Well, I'm in your hands.
Would people who would like to take a break like to wave a hand? I expected it. Yeah, there's a few that would like to take a break. So 5 minutes. Okay, we'll resume in 5 minutes.
Thanks. Sent around to council. It was a draft, so there's a few differences, in particular at the front end. Some of the public health slides are updated, a few minor differences, but largely the same as presentation we sent yesterday. So I thought it would be helpful to provide a pretty comprehensive overview of our pandemic response. So staff have been sending regular updates to council. So you've been getting the 3 times a week Dr. Wong media briefing notes, twice a week regional situation reports, once a week coordinated pandemic response newsletter, and lots of email updates in between on significant and emerging issues. But I recognize, that's probably, you're getting information in an incremental way. And so as you get information in an incremental way, it's sometimes hard to see the whole big picture. And so what I and the leadership team and senior management team have tried to do over the last few days is put together this overview presentation to try to give you sort of that comprehensive overall picture. So it's divided up into 5 sections. And having talked to Chair Clarke this morning, my suggestion is we'll do each section and then do Q&A at the end of each section. But I'll defer to Chair Clarke on that. So the first section, Dr. Wong is going to do. I think there's 3 or 4 or 5 slides there. We'll pause for questions, and then I will work us through the other 4 sections, pausing at the end of each section for Q&A. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Wong at this point. Public health update. Dr. Wong.
Hi, thank you, everyone. What you are seeing on this slide is a preview of our epi curve that will distinguish cases that are associated with a facility outbreak in the light green color from cases that are not. in the darker green color. This is a preview, and the numbers are not the most up to date, but we are aiming to have this ready in time for Wednesday's dashboard refresh. So you are the first to see it. What it shows is that Waterloo Region's epicurve is actually a tale of two epicurves. One showing that community spread has slowed down, but the other showing the significant contribution of cases associated with facility outbreaks in long-term care and retirement homes in particular to our case count. While we have good swab supply and testing capacity in Ontario now, provincial testing guidance continues for the time being to prioritize groups and settings considered more vulnerable, such as long-term care homes and retirement homes. And the greatly expanded testing in these groups and settings is filling up and possibly testing the limits of the expanded lab capacity. That said, the province is working to continue to increase lab capacity. That is why our number of confirmed cases, as well as our number of persons tested, will continue to grow. Health system capacity continues to be manageable, although it is definitely not sitting idle. Although hospitals have not seen the surge in hospitalizations and ICU stays that were originally projected, they are still caring for a number of COVID positive patients, as well as people hospitalized for other reasons, and hospital resources are also being redeployed to help address pressing needs in long-term care homes and retirement homes, which can be very significant. Mike, if you could turn to slide 4.
Yep.
Thank you. In addition to our usual public health roles in infectious diseases, such as health status monitoring and reporting, case and contact management, and outbreak support to facilities who are experiencing outbreaks, public health has worked closely with hospital and non-hospital partners to mount an integrated community-wide health response to the pandemic. For example, public health worked with hospital and primary care providers to establish assessment clinics and centers, and more recently, to expand testing in these clinics and centers, as well as through the use of mobile assessment teams that can be quickly deployed to settings such as long-term care or retirement homes. If you could go to the next slide, Mike. Thank you. Public health is also a key contributor to the health system response established through Ontario Health to bolster support to long-term care and retirement homes across the sector, all homes. The hospitals have been given a key leadership role to coordinate support to these homes for issues such as staffing, personal protective equipment, and infection prevention and control, pulling in resources across the health sector. I want to emphasize it's to support the homes who continue to take the lead and to work alongside them. And this support is to be available for all homes, whether they are in outbreak or not. Finally, I am also a member of the leadership table of Ontario Health West Region, So Ontario Health regions, of which there are 5 across the province, receive direction from provincial command, other provincial leadership tables, as well as the Premier's office. And Ontario Health West, which is the region that Waterloo region is in, extends from Guelph to Windsor and from the Bruce Peninsula to Niagara. Lee Fairclough, President of St. Mary's Hospital, Dr. Sharon Ball, Primary Care Lead of the Cambridge North Dumfries Ontario Health Team, and myself form a triad group of leads, and we have been assigned oversight by Ontario Health for the health system response efforts for Waterloo Region, Wellington, and Guelph. So that concludes the overview that I wanted to provide. Thank you.
So it might be good at this point to pause if there's questions for Dr. Wong.
I do have a question from Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Clarke. And Shuli, you may have already addressed this in the outline, but can you just clarify, when you use the word guidance, I think a lot of people, and I know we're being live streamed right now, sort of assume that it's a suggestion or a bit of a direction. Can you just talk for a minute about what guidance actually means, the burden that puts on you as the acting officer of public health?
Sure. So the province has been issuing guidance, which also can be considered recommendations, as well as directives. So directives are mandatory. And of course, guidance is just recommendation, expert recommendations. And so, you know, for example, the province has said that, you know, these are the groups and settings that they want prioritized for testing. And so, you know, Regional Waterloo Public Health, like other health units, you know, follows that guidance. And we generally do, unless there is some reason for us as local medical officers of health to say, we disagree with provincial expertise, or we disagree with provincial requests to do something. So, you know, that would normally take a situation where we have grounds that I believe we would have grounds to say, we're not going to follow the advice or the recommendations of the provincial experts. We're going to do something different here. So, you know, there can be adjustments that we make locally, and we do that, where we think that, you know, within the scope of the general principles of the guidance, we make some differences. We implement in operationalizing this guidance. We implement some discretion in order to meet local needs better. But generally, the principles of the guidance, you know, all health units generally follow those. So I hope that provides a little bit of clarification. Yeah, we are receiving a lot of guidance and a lot of direction from the province.
Yeah, I might just add, you know, I think in Chair Redmond, in response to your question, Shuli focused a lot on the guidance, because I think that was your question, but she also made reference to directives. And again, just from my regular conversations with Shuli, there have been numerous and frequent directives from the province. Like they've actually become quite directive about who should be testing, you know, testing frequency, target, I don't know about targets, but they've been quite directive, more so than I think we've ever seen, especially related to long-term care homes, retirement homes, and congregated living settings. I think because quite rightly, they're very, very concerned about, you know, response to pandemic outbreaks in those settings. Very directive.
Councillor Ivanovic.
Thanks very much, Chair Clarke, and thanks, Dr. Wong, for all of the great work that you and your team have been doing. I do want to touch on the curve and the data that you've been providing, and last week the fact that we did add on the data by city and divided it up by those portions that are related to the long-term care facilities and those that aren't. And as we know, I mean, that was really in response to a community request more than any sort of epidemiological value to it. And one of the things that certainly I've expressed some concern about is that we really should, what would be of more value, particularly from a social policy and health policy development point of view, start focusing on data collection in other areas, including race, socioeconomics, and so on. And we know locally that there's been groups like the ACB Network and others that have been calling for that, but it's been a broader call across the province, and a number of public health units, including Peel, Toronto, London, Middlesex, and others have actually started to collect and disaggregate that data. Last week, I was on a call with mayors from around the world that was organized by former Mayor Bloomberg, and there were 5 areas on that call that, when it came to issues of race, color, ethnicity, and so on, when it comes to COVID, that the professor from I believe it was Stanford had suggested that really as community leaders we should be focusing on, and they included tracking data on COVID cases by race, ethnicity, and geography, communicating and building trust with communities of color. Some of this obviously has a U.S.-centric focus, enhancing access to testing and healthcare for marginalized communities, protecting essential and low-wage workers, and providing social services to keep vulnerable groups safe, much of which has been work that has been done and we'll hear about later on. I know provincially there hasn't been a directive to collect this data. I know locally we haven't gone that route yet, but I would like to actually request, much in the same spirit as the areas that Councillor Galloway identified earlier with Mr. Schmidt, that we actually take this away and bring a report back to regional council about what it would take for us to start collecting this data, and the benefits that it would potentially provide in terms of our social policy development going and health policy development going forward. I think, we all recognize these are going to be increased pressures post-COVID on all of us, and we're going to have to make informed decisions. And I for one, would like them to be data-based driven decisions going forward. And so, A, I mean, do you care to comment to it? And then B, like I say, I'd like to see a report come back.
Shirley, you're muted.
Thank you, Councillor Verbanovic. The province is looking at this question right now, and so it may provide guidance to local health units. That said, our staff have already started looking at this question because we understand that, this kind of these kinds of questions need to be implemented in a thoughtful way, so as to not potentially create unintended consequences, such as people not being happy why we are asking for their race when they're seeking health service. So there's sort of other people that feel that we shouldn't be asking questions that we don't need to provide the service per se. There's also a requirement for public health units to not collect information that we don't need. So I'm not saying that this is not information that's not important, or that we don't, wouldn't be very helpful in terms of informing future decisions, like you mentioned. What I'm saying is that I believe that it needs to be implemented in a thoughtful way. I've also learned from provincial experts that there are best practices for how you implement it in order to not create the unintended effects, negative effects of adding it to the questionnaire. So our staff are in the process of trying to get that from not only the province, but from other health units that are either implementing it or said that they will begin to implement it. So we are working on that as quickly as we can to consider, all the elements that we need to consider. I am going to suggest that we are under very significant pressures from the province to continually provide data, in addition to the data that we put on our dashboard in order to keep the community informed and updated, and enhancements to this data. We also are asked by the province for increasing amounts of data in increasingly short timeframes. And so I think I would just respectfully request that you let staff take this back. I think producing a report is going to add to our load in terms of having to answer both the province and their requests are not just requests, they're directives. We have to answer their reporting requirements, as well as the other reporting requirements that we are trying to, the other reporting elements that we're trying to keep up to date on our own local dashboard. So I can tell you that we are trying to work as quickly as we can to look at this in order to be able to, implement this in a thoughtful way.
And I totally agree with you. I think that's really important. I think one of the things that's helpful is that a number of groups associated with the African, Caribbean, and Black community and others are part of who's calling for this. So that'll help, I think, a little bit with the sensitivity around the question. But there's no question that there needs to be sensitivity around how the data is used and interpreted and all those kinds of things. And so, to be clear, I'm not looking for this for next week or even the next cycle. But if we can add it to the list of reports to come forward in a reasonable, timely manner, that would be great. And just finally, there will be, from my mayor's task force on equity, diversity, and inclusion, there is a formal letter going both to the premier and the prime minister, to which Chair Redmond will be copied, with the request that we start gathering this data, and it'll actually be coming out later today or tomorrow. That's been signed by a number of organizations and representatives from them to the provincial and federal government, because ultimately they're the ones that need to make the ultimate call.
Yep. And I think, I think largely, I think what you're getting from Dr. Wong, it's largely a timing and resource issue. I don't think there's any, resistance necessarily to doing this, as long as we do it in a very sensitive and thoughtful way. But it is a timing and resource issue. So we'll look at that. And, I think we're likely to get some guidance or directive from the province. The other possibility is the province may undertake that work, which frankly, I think would be, a good use of their resources. This slide shows we had 846 cases today. And so basically we would have to right now contact those 846 people and interview them to collect the demographic data, which frankly at this point we don't have. So it's not a matter of just disaggregating it. I believe it's a matter of going back and collecting data on 850 people that we don't have the data right now. So it's possible to do. It's just going to take some time and some effort. Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Kiefer.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I got a couple of questions. First of all, thank you, Dr. Wong. I've said it before, you and your team for doing great work in the region of Waterloo and beyond. My questions are, first one is, you mentioned mobile assessment teams. How many of those would we have available in the region?
We don't have set teams. What we have is we have family doctors who have agreed to, as much as they can do it, to be on call, so to speak, to be able to quickly assemble and then be deployed, for example, to a particular home, to quickly do testing for that home, in order, to make it easier for the homes, both for the residents as well as for their staff, to get timely testing. So it's not a set number. It's fluid. We have a number of physicians who are wanting and willing to take on that, and we have already deployed multiple times those mobile assessment teams into homes. And that's being overseen by the hospitals and the assessment centers.
And in your estimation, Dr. Wong, do we have enough available physicians to be part of this assessment program?
Yeah,
that are willing to do it. I'm talking about. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't think that's a problem, but we are also in the process of scaling up through deployment of our paramedics in the future to assist with that. But right now, we are able to quickly address needs either through people being tested at the testing clinics or assessment centers, because, for example, those clinics and centers have opened up capacity for additional testing, or as needed to quickly deploy mobile teams. So we are able to address the needs at this time, and we are also scaling up to be able to further address needs. So I don't have information about the paramedic thing right now. It's just something that's currently being planned. So I will have more information about that later, though. So, but it's just to further supplement our resources. And right now, with all the testing that we have been doing and that is being planned, we are filling up the testing capacity. In terms of the overall lab system capacity across the province.
Yeah, I can see us having more problems with that coming up, and hopefully we'll have a solution for that, or a quick solution, but I'm not so sure. The second question I have, Dr. Wong, is could you tell me how many COVID patients are at the Cambridge Memorial right now?
No, I couldn't tell you that. The hospitals would have a better handle, but I think that number is pretty fluid because basically, anyone that needs hospital care, in that area would be hospitalized by Cambridge Memorial.
Okay. Do you happen to know how many long-term care patients are there?
No.
I think you said there was some from Forest Heights that were deployed there, 21, 22, something like that.
Yes, overall, I don't know the specific breakdown by hospital because, again, that's more of an operational decision. But I do know that all three area hospitals, including Cambridge Memorial, have participated in receiving patients from Forest Heights, which is the only home to date where we've had to transfer some residents over to area hospitals. So definitely Cambridge Memorial has been a partner in that initiative, which is greatly appreciated.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Jowett.
Thank you, Chair Clarke. Dr. Wong, I'm looking at this. I know that you said philosophically there are times when there are recommendations or guidance, and then there are directives, and there are times when those might not be in sync. Have we had an example of that thus far with the province?
Sorry if I cause confusion. They're in sync generally. There haven't been directives that have been out of sync, but there have been a lot of updates to the guidance, recommendations, and directives. So sometimes it's clear as if they're not in sync, because one week it's one thing, the next week it's another thing, right? So there's been a lot of updates, and I think it's really been because we are learning more and more about COVID, and we are learning how to better respond. And so, those guidance documents or directives keep getting updated on a regular basis. And that can lead some of the confusion. Sometimes one will say 48 hours, and then the next one will say 72 hours. And then, one will say, well, these are these groups that are being prioritized for testing. And next one will say, no, it's these groups. And so it can change quickly.
Oh, I much appreciate that clarity, because that makes sense to me, because I know that even on the site, when you go for the assessment factors, there used to be 4 and now there's significantly more. The final question I just had for you, Dr. Wong, is, okay, so we have a certain amount of test capacity, and as per directives, we are leaning towards these recommended avenues. So the more we test, I guess, the sooner we'll get to diagnose people, which is one good thing. But the more we test, the more we see cases in that targeted group. And so are we having a false sense of security in the general population because we are not testing? Or is that a curve, the epi curve that we will see next? Or what do you predict there?
No, that's a very good question, Councillor Jowett. Thank you. So we do know for sure that testing is underestimating the number of people that are infected. That is clear, because we have been saying from the beginning that if you have the illness, if you have symptoms, but you're not in one of the priority groups, or you do not go to the hospital, you're generally not going to be tested. And even the provincial self-assessment tool will say, well, if you have these, if you need to consult for medical care, consult, but if you don't, then stay at home, self-isolate. So for sure, we're going to underestimate the number of people that have been infected. I actually, don't think that anytime soon we're going to be able to expand testing to the general population, but it doesn't mean that we're not advising these people to do the appropriate thing for the community transmission. We're advising those people to self-isolate, whether they have been whether their symptoms represent COVID or not. We're asking them to self-isolate as if they could have COVID. So the action is being taken in terms of, how to reduce the community risk, even if we don't have the testing to confirm. That said, right, for sure, if there's a way, potentially with blood tests in the future, to see just how many people have been infected in the region and across Ontario and Canada, then that would be helpful. That would be helpful to know the overall picture. But in terms of disease control, the important thing is that if people have symptoms that could be due to COVID and they're not being tested, they need to still self-isolate at home. And the testing is now, being focused on those groups in which the testing result will actually potentially change the recommendation, either for their clinical care or for outbreak management. Whereas if you can safely recover at home, whether you have a test or not that says you're positive doesn't change the recommendation that you're going to receive, which is that you need to self-isolate. So hopefully that provides a bit of reassurance, because I think there is a perception out there that if we don't test everyone, we can't control the disease. And so I just wanted to let people know that it is not only the testing that allows us to put in control measures. In fact, the vast majority of the control that has already been put in place and that has been responsible for the community spread slowing down has been the social measures that we have put in place, like, you know, the closure of businesses and the social distancing. That has accounted for the large majority of the gains that we have seen in terms of slowing down the spread.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
If I could maybe just add one thing to what Dr. Wong said, Councillor Jowett, in response to your first question about guidance and directives, what Dr. Wong talked about was the public health guidance and directives that we're getting, and they're rapidly changing. The other thing that's happening is we, the region, the organization, are getting directives from multiple ministries at the same time. And actually, sometimes those directives or guidance aren't fully aligned. And in my next part of my presentation, I'm going to talk about different areas of the organization that are impacted. Sunnyside Home is getting directives from the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Long-Term Care, Public Health, and there have been times when those aren't fully aligned. You know, it takes sometimes 24, 48 hours. They eventually get into alignment, but initially it has people at Sunnyside scratching their head saying, which of these do we follow? And that's true in a few other program areas. We'll talk a bit more about that later in the presentation.
It's actually true in the health sector overall too, what Mike mentioned, right? So there can be a bit of delay. And so, for example, a long-term care home could get direction from the Ministry of Long-Term Care, from the Ministry of Health, from, you know, like multiple channels, and there can be slightly contradictory elements, at least on a temporary basis. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Shantz?
Thank you. Helen kind of covered some of where I was going. Thank you first, Dr. Wong, for all you're doing. This has been a crazy couple of months for you and your triad. So thank you again for all you do. I really like the graph. The more I can see in one picture is really helpful to me. My question is about trends. So clearly, as you said, we're not testing everybody in the community, but it looks like we're fairly stable, and we've been fairly stable all along. So, and we've been able to manage at that level. So presumably, if we can stay there as we gradually open things up, if we can stay there, things will be good. I just wonder, I noticed there's sort of an up and down cycle to the numbers, both in long-term care and in the community. And I wonder if you can draw any conclusions from that. Is it, you know, a few days after a weekend when maybe people are out and about more, or is it just really pretty random?
Oh, no, that's a good question. No, that's what we expect to see. We never expect to see a smooth curve. All epi curves look like this. And it's just, you know, it's not expected to be uniform across the across time. It's expected to be like this. And so, yeah, that's I would say that what we're seeing on the graph, you know, is showing that the community spread is such that it allows the healthcare system to be manageable. You know, outside of the facility outbreaks, which is a sort of another issue, which is putting a strain on the healthcare system in other ways. But yeah.
And so is there anything as we come out of this that the statistics can say to us that will help us as we manage that sort of coming out the other side and sort of release some of those restrictions?
Oh yeah, no, that's a very good question. So all our statistics, you know, they go up to the province, and the province puts together all that data from across, you know, health units, and they use that to inform modeling that's being done by provincial experts and in consultation with, you know, university experts. And I know there's this group of experts that are working on the modeling. So all of this will be able to feed into a much more solid picture, because you're going to have many more cases, together to be able to form a picture, to provide projections about, what we could see in the coming weeks and months. And then that will help inform the Premier and his, command table about when some of the restrictions can start to be lifted. So that's stuff that we don't do that locally, but we feed that information up, and so that's going to be very helpful to the province.
Thank you.
Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Wong, in regards to the new chart on the dashboard with the disaggregated information municipality by municipality, and thanks for differentiating between the numbers of community spread versus facility incidents. I have a question in regards to how staff at a facility is recorded in terms of their home community. So for instance, if I worked at a Kitchener facility, was tested at that Kitchener facility and was positive, but I lived in Waterloo, do I show up on the Kitchener graph, or do I show up on the Waterloo graph? And what if I actually lived in Stratford or some area even outside our municipality? Where would and I'm positive, where would I show up?
Well, those are great questions. So if you're a staff person and you work at a facility in Kitchener, but you live in Waterloo, you will show up in the Waterloo stats. If you live in Stratford, you will show up in the Stratford stats. So you won't necessarily show up in our stats related to long-term care home outbreaks. This is the way that the cases have always been attributed, so to speak, across the province. It's by their residence, so where the people reside. So for residents of long-term care homes, it's that long-term care home because that's where they reside. Now, given the extraordinary situation with long-term care home and retirement home outbreaks, our health units made a decision, and I think we may have been the first or one of the first to publicly report regularly on what was going on in terms of numbers in each of the long-term care homes that were experiencing outbreak. And sometimes what happens is some of the staff that live elsewhere do get counted in the facility outbreak information, even if they don't reside in Waterloo region. So there's a little bit of that difference there in this kind of extraordinary circumstance. And that's if we have that information. If we have that information, we put it there because it helps give us a little better picture of what's actually going on, just how many total staff, have been infected in that facility. But we cannot guarantee that we'll have all the staff, because generally when they're in another health unit area, they're counted in their stats, not ours. And if there's, so I'll just leave it at that. So generally though, for the stats related to cases attributed by area municipality, it's where the staff person lives.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of comments and a question relating to testing. My first comment just has to do with some apprehension I have about the collecting demographic and publicizing demographic data. I understand the benefits, but I'm aware that COVID, there's been a lot of very racist rhetoric going on in the world about COVID in particular, and I don't know whether this approach would help that or harm it. So just an observation. One other comment, I might find it helpful to have over top of these graphs sort of a third line showing the increase in the rate of testing. I think that it would be helpful. You know, when I look at it right now, I see that, you know, sort of a steadily increasing number of cases, but I think that if we had it in the context of a steadily increasing rate of testing, I think that it might be a little more enlightening. Just an observation, and I don't want to put staff to any more work than they're already being put to. My question, though, does have to do with testing, and it's really just a clarification. My understanding is that we don't actually do any testing ourselves, that the hospitals do it, the assessment centers do it. We're talking about information we're collecting. I'm just wondering how that information gets reported back into us. If we were to collect different data, how that would happen, given that we're not the ones doing it ourselves.
Thank you for those questions. You know, excellent questions. I just wanted to say, yes, our staff have been trying very hard to put in like indicators on the graph when, you know, expanded testing began and things like that. We're just having some technical issues, but we're working on it, because ultimately that is actually an important element to put on these epi graphs, so people understand that increases are likely related to increases in testing. So we'll keep working on that. The question about testing is you're correct. It's actually the people doing the testing that have to ask the questions. So we would need to work with our testing partners to onboard new questions that would be asked. And in terms of what information do we get back, it's whatever the province deems reportable to public health. That comes back. So for example, we don't get all the negative tests. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, but we don't get all the negative tests. So what we get are the positive tests, because by legislation, those need to be reported to us either by the hospitals, physicians, or the labs. So we end up getting that, so we're able to track that. We also know through our partners being willing to give us this info every day, we thank them for that, the number of tests that have been completed at each of the clinics and assessment centers. So we collate that every day to give the number of tests done to date as well, to give an impression, to give a sense to the community about the numbers that are tested. That helps.
Thank you. I see another question from Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Clarke. Your questions and Dr. Wong's answers just led to another question. When we talk about cases, if I'm somebody who was tested and then wasn't positive and later on was retested and was positive, does that count as 2 tests or 1 test?
In terms of tests, that counts as 2 tests.
So
Yeah.
this is number of tests, not number of individuals necessarily?
I'm just gonna.
Sorry, and you can get back to me.
I'm just gonna make sure that. Number. Whoops. Sorry, hit the wrong button here. Yeah, there's not. Sorry. These are the total number of tests that are performed. That's right, total number of tests rather than persons tested.
Great, thank you.
I see no other questions for Dr. Wong. Thank you very much. Good presentation. I think we'll go back to Mr. Murray.
Yep. So, so we covered 1 out of 5 sections. So the next section is actually pretty short. Federal and provincial directives. There's already been some questions about those. So I'll go through this pretty quickly. Federally, there are actually relatively few directives that impact the region directly. One that impacts everybody is mandatory 14-day isolation after returning from travel abroad. And you'll recall several weeks ago, the province or the federal government introduced that, and it is enforceable under the Quarantine Act. So that is a very firm directive from the federal government, and that's being enforced broadly across the country. In addition to that directive, they've also, and we've all seen this, issued ongoing guidance. And I would say two of the key messages from the federal government have been stay home unless you need to go out for essential trips, and maintain social distancing 2 meters or more apart. And that the guidance also evolves, the mask wearing, that's also now becoming, I think, part of the ongoing guidance from federal and provincial governments. So that's federally. Provincially, as we've talked about, there are significantly more directives and guidance from the provincial government that affect the region directly. So you'll all recall back March 17th, the province declared an emergency. That gave them the ability to issue emergency orders, which are enforceable. And so they have issued, since March 17th, something over 30 emergency orders. They're all listed on the provincial website. You can actually go and look at them and read the legal wording. The two that probably affect the region most directly, there was early on emergency orders of closing of all non-essential businesses and establishments. That captured our childcare centers, libraries, and museums. So there's an emergency order that requires us to close those facilities. There's also an emergency order that prohibits public events and prohibits gatherings of more than 5 people. And again, those are enforceable. They affect us directly, and they are being enforced by public health inspectors, regional bylaw, local municipal bylaw, and Waterloo Region Police. And we report weekly on the cumulative monitoring, enforcement, and compliance activities. Those orders were extended to May the 6th. They, I think, get extended in 14-day increments. May 6th is coming up, and my speculation is that today we will likely see some announcements from the province further extending some or all of those orders. In addition to the orders, they've also issued ongoing guidance. Dr. Wong talked about some of it, but all this guidance we've all heard. Stay home unless it's essential trips, maintain social distancing, and more advice about wearing masks when you're out in the public. So those are, I'll just pause there. That's the end of that section. If there's any questions, either for me, for Deborah Arnold, Chris Fletcher, Dr. Wong, about the federal provincial directives that directly affect the region, we're happy to answer those.
I do have a question from Councillor Jowett.
So just quickly, Mike, when you were speaking to that, a thought came to my mind a while ago about, I think you've seen a trend with restaurateurs who are doing a lot of takeout food. And I know that under our public health umbrella, we're supposed to make sure that food prep is in compliance with food regulatory standards. So how are we managing to make sure that people who are doing this takeout eating, and it's becoming a bit of a trend, like I think it's called date night Tuesday or Wednesday now or something, but how are we making sure that that food prep is still maintained under our compliance expectations?
Yep, great question. It'll come up later in my presentation when I talk about regional programs and services, ones that are continuing and ones that are interrupted. Ones that are continuing in public health include inspection of food premises. And I'm hoping that Dr. Wong is still on. And since you've asked the question, maybe we just do that update right now.
Sorry, Mike.
No, this is great. It's quite relevant. Shuli?
I'm sorry, could you just...
The question was, many restaurants have moved to takeout, curbside pickup or takeout.
Yeah.
And is public health still doing our work in terms of restaurant inspections to make sure that the food prep in those establishments is safe? And I believe restaurant inspections are one of the programs that we're actually continuing.
Yes, and if there are people who have any concerns, we have that submit a complaint button that's being very frequently used, as I understand it. So, you know, if we receive complaints or concerns, that's also another time that we will go in and look at things. But yes, no, restaurant inspections, ensuring the safety of our food continues to be a priority activity done by public health.
Have we closed anyone down, Dr. Wong?
I don't have the top of my head.
No, we've, you know, in terms of overall
significant risk, we would, yeah.
Yeah. In terms of overall monitoring, enforcement, and compliance on these emergency orders, I think that there's been a total of 6 charges laid, and we report on that regularly. So I think there was a couple of personal service settings. There was a tattoo parlor, a hair salon, a nail salon, a vape shop, a couple of gatherings in residential areas, and one charge that the police laid for guys playing pickup basketball that wouldn't disperse. So I think that's the total of 6 charges to date.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you very much. And this is for Mike. I just wanted to just confirm that under the provincial directives, your speculation is that the order prohibiting public events and gatherings of more than 5 people will likely continue once the province updates us?
Well, you know, it's going to be really interesting. You know, tomorrow is May the 6th. I'm going to talk later in my presentation about incremental reopening. And so whether they take this opportunity to modify any of those orders, some of them I'm sure will be extended. You know, the childcare centers, libraries, museums, I would actually bet a lot that those are going to get extended. The 5 people, you know, it's possible that at some point they relax that and they increase it from, you know, 5 to 10 or, you know, something. So I think that's going to be part of the incremental opening up that the Premier is talking about. And, you know, that's going to play out over the next couple of weeks.
Okay, and if I may, Madam Chair, then to date, they've been just updating those approximately every 2 to 4 weeks?
I believe, and Deborah Arnold can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the orders run on 14-day cycles. And so I think they need to be updated every 14 days, or extended, I guess is the right word, extended every 14 days. Otherwise, they automatically expire. The state of emergency, I think, can be extended for 14 days or 28 days by the provincial legislature. So 14 days by order in council, I guess, and 28 days by legislature. So I know Deborah's on the call, and so she can correct me if I got all that wrong.
Sounds not. Thanks for the clarification. I appreciate it.
Right. No other questions, Mike?
Okay. So if you've scanned this presentation last night, you'll realize this next section is a little bit long. So I apologize in advance for that. But as we put it, we wanted to provide council with, you know, kind of a comprehensive overview of what's going on within this organization in terms of dealing with the pandemic, dealing with all these directives, what programs have been affected, which ones have been less affected. And so what you're going to see over the next probably 15 to 20 minutes reflects input from the whole senior management team. And so just so bear with me, I'll go pretty quickly because, you know, you have the presentation somewhere. I'll go pretty quickly, and then I imagine there'll be lots of questions at the end of this section of the presentation. Okay, so big picture, all regional critical services continue to be provided. Most of those critical services have to be done through the usual workplace. Things like paramedic services, Sunnyside, water supply, wastewater treatment. Those cannot be done remotely. There are some critical services that are being provided remotely, and you'll see as I go through the details what some of those areas are. I talked about the provincial directives, so some of our program facilities have been really impacted by those directives. Libraries, museums, childcare centers are not considered essential. They are required to close. All our administration buildings, we've said, are closed to the public. and that is consistent with the federal and provincial guidelines around social distancing and avoiding any non-essential trips. So we want our staff to avoid non-essential trips to their workplace, and we want the public to avoid non-essential trips, and we need to maintain physical distancing. And we've reported previously in caucus and open, we have many staff who are working productively from home using technology, which I'll talk about. Okay, so that's overview, and now what you're going to get is drilling into, dozens actually of regional programs and services. So public health, in terms of COVID-19 response, huge amount of the focus of public health over the last 7 weeks has been on managing the COVID response. Dr. Wong has talked about this today and many times over the last 7 weeks. Very shortly after March 11th, we created a public health call center. The calls are transferred from our Service First call center, and public health staff respond to specific questions, concerns, complaints. They continue to do investigations. Case and contact management is a huge amount of effort on behalf of public health. As Dr. Wong talked about, they're providing enhanced infection prevention and control support to long-term care homes, retirement homes, other congregate settings as required by the province. They deal with dozens and dozens of questions from all kinds of people and organizations in the community. How do we interpret guidelines? Is this safe? Is this not safe? So they've spent huge amounts of time responding to those. We've got a number of staff in public health, different program areas in public health have been redeployed within the public health department to support the COVID-19 response. One of the things that I have to say was touching and heartwarming for me, I went and visited 99 Regina a week or two ago, and I ran into a number of people, previous retirees, previous employees who had come back to help out. And it just speaks to the ongoing dedication of public health staff. Even when they've left, they come back to help out. And as Dr. Wong talked about, the directives, requirements, reporting from the province has been really onerous, taken huge amounts of work. Councillor Jowett, to your, I think was your earlier question about inspections. So these are programs that are considered critical that continue. So reportable diseases, investigations, emergency dental. We have a dental program. We've scaled that back to dealing with only emergencies, and actually some of the dental program staff either have been laid off or redeployed because we're only dealing with emergency dental. Breastfeeding support continues. Some parts of Healthy Babies, Healthy Children, and infant development, some parts of those programs have continued. Some have been basically put on hold, and some staff in those areas either redeployed or laid off. Vaccine distribution continues, and food safety complaints, that's the restaurant inspections. So that's a lot of work in public health continuing. Paramedic services, they continue to provide normal service. I think you would have seen in the situation reports, a month or so ago, call volumes were down. They're now starting to work their way back up again. Paramedic services has done a lot to make sure that staff are safe and the patients that they're treating are safe. So they undergo active screening daily. To date, 4 paramedics have tested positive. They were all self-isolated. I think a number of them have already come back to work. Some of the community paramedicine staff, that fledgling program, have been made available to help out with other aspects of COVID response. Great collaboration with system partners. And this is just an ongoing theme. You're going to get this over and over in this presentation. The collaboration with community and system partners has been just phenomenal. And they've done some really interesting work on real-time data access so that everybody, dispatch and paramedics, know what the status of each of the hospitals is in terms of bed availability, ICU bed availability. And I think the goal that Steve Van Valkenburg's articulated is that the ambulance takes the patient to the right hospital the first time to minimize inter-hospital transfers. Okay, so that's public health. Sunnyside, we've talked about a little bit already. As I mentioned earlier, they get directives from Ministry of Health, Ministry of Long-Term Care, Public Health, and it has been an intensely challenging period for Sunnyside and as you know, for all long-term care homes. I have to say the Sunnyside management and staff have done just a phenomenal job. Here's just some of the measures that have been put in place. Symptomatic residents and their contacts are isolated for 14 days. We created, on really short notice, an isolation unit within Sunnyside Home. So we've got dedicated space for that. We can set, potentially infected patients aside so they don't infect the other population. Again, just a great whole of organization effort. We've redeployed staff from many different program areas into Sunnyside Home to provide backup support and help with some of the non-direct resident care work, laundry, cleaning, those kinds of things. So just amazing for me as CAO to see people actually volunteering to go and help out at Sunnyside. Children's services, as you know, we operate 5 directly operated childcare centers. All non-emergency childcare centers have been closed. So all of our 5 were closed early on. And then as the province rolled out this emergency childcare program for children, families of essential workers, and that list has now expanded dramatically, we reopened Edith McIntosh and Christopher Children's Centers. Other childcare operators have reopened. The home childcare program is taking children. So the region are operating those 2 centers. There are other centers and home childcare in the community. As it says here, it's probably 150 to 200 children who are being served in emergency childcare. The province has said that they will provide funding to cover the operating costs of emergency childcare. We've yet to see any details on that. So we're taking them at their word as we operate and incur costs that we're going to be made whole. And because 3 of our 5 centers remain closed, some of our children's services staff are on temporary layoff because they have no work to do. Continuing in community services, employment and income support. We saw an initial increase in OW applications, spiked up, but now it's kind of come back down. So early April, we're getting on average 30 applications a day. Late April, that's like less than half of that. And I think that's as the CERB, Canada Emergency Response Benefit, has kicked in and people have accessed that. OW caseload in March is a little bit higher than February. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with OW caseload over the next couple months. So the other thing is, on the one hand, there's lots of people in the community that are impacted who are out of work. On the other hand, there are employers in the community who are actually looking for staff, and in some cases, actually having a difficult time finding staff, especially staff in lower paid positions who may be saying, you know what, I can get $500 a week on CERB. I'm actually not going to put myself at risk in a low paying job. So, we continue to work on that. And again, in employment income support, we have some non-critical staff that have been redeployed either to other parts of the organization or they're on temporary layoff. Housing and homelessness, you've actually, I think, heard a lot, especially about homelessness. There's been a huge amount of effort by Douglas, Ryan, the whole working group on community supports to help out marginalized people in our community. And I think they've done just an amazing job. You'll know the Overflow Shelter was relocated to the A.R. Kaufman Y. Huge kudos to the YMCA for actually offering up that facility and making it available. Staff have been redeployed from right across the organization to help staff it. It's actually an amazing community story. to start up that overflow shelter. Isolation shelter space is available. I think you probably saw just yesterday, I think we had our first positive case in a shelter. They are now located in the dedicated isolation space. And I think just today, it actually might have just come out while committee's meeting, there's a daytime drop-in space opening up in downtown Kitchener, and work continues on daytime drop-in space in downtown Cambridge. The other thing we've talked a bit about, there are ongoing affordable housing needs. They exist now. They'll continue to exist after the pandemic. And Ryan and his team are continuing to work on implementing the 10-year housing and homelessness plan. There's going to be reports coming forward that the steering committee has looked at, dealing with a couple of pilot projects to try to create more affordable housing, and the WRH master plan implementation. And again, in housing, some staff are on temporary layoff because of their inability to do productive work. Transit. Council has dealt with a number of reports related to transit, even some questions today about transit. So that has been another, really challenging program area to manage appropriately. Probably not a lot of new news on this slide. Transit ridership's about 30% of normal. Big reduction of GRT service happened a week ago. Another reduction is happening in a week or so. Jane talked about the staff implications of that. Free transit continuing until May 31st. Thomas talked about the work that's going on now to figure out how do we get back into revenue service, fare service. Transit has done a lot to try to make sure that transit is safe for our operators and safe for our passengers. Increased cleaning and disinfection, rear door entry, and we're going to have to figure out how do we provide a safe work environment for our staff and a safe traveling environment for passengers as we reopen transit. Water and wastewater, it continues to function normally. You turn your tap on in the morning, water comes out, flush your toilet, water goes away. So a huge amount of work behind the scenes to make sure that all of the water staff are able to do their work safely. Other area that's continued uninterrupted that is a behind the scenes, rarely seen, we have an environmental enforcement group and a lab, a water testing lab, that continues to operate uninterrupted, and that's the kind of work that has to be done on site, can't be done at home. So water testing continues. And then a lot of the important water services, water and wastewater work, planning, engineering, source water protection, water efficiency, all those programs continue to be delivered by staff working at home and doing that remotely. We did make, I think this was a request of a couple of township mayors and residents, temporary arrangements to facilitate private water well testing. So that's in place. There's been probably 20 tests done in the last couple weeks. And just the last couple bullets, some of the things that have put in place to try to keep the staff safe as they continue to do this critical work. Transportation, roads. All our normal operations and maintenance activities continue, signal signs, road maintenance, planning and engineering projects being delivered remotely. Anybody who's driven around lately, there's less traffic than normal, you've seen that. And a whole bunch of other work does continue remotely. Permit applications, plan reviews, traffic signal designs. And again, last bullet, a number of the things that the transportation area has put in place to keep the staff safe, again, while they're doing this critical work. Waste management has been, waste management's been an interesting focus. I think people have realized what an essential service waste collection is over the last 7 weeks. We've probably had lots of questions about waste service. So I think you're aware of some of the things we've done, increased bag limits from 4 to 6, dramatic increase in recyclables and green bin waste collected. And the speculation is more people are at home for more hours of the day. So, waste that they might have generated in their workplace, they're now generating at home, and we're picking it up from the curbside. So that early on imposed a really significant workload on our collection contractors at the same time as we're dealing with some staffing issues. That's all been resolved. There's a lot of waste being collected, but they're hitting it. Large item pickup suspended for a couple reasons, partly workload and partly just trying to keep the collection crews safe. Large items often need 2 people to pick them up, kind of one at either side of a couch, and then they're in pretty close proximity. So that's part of the rationale behind the large item pickup suspension. Landfill sites have remained open to commercial customers right the way through this. And jumping down a bullet, the small vehicle transfer stations in Cambridge and Waterloo reopened on May the 4th, and we got lots of kind of thumbs up on that. People were looking forward to that. Yard waste collection was also an issue. That started up again on April 13th and seems to be going well. Design and construction, a little bit of conversation earlier today about that already. Thomas Schmidt talked about a few of projects that have been deferred, but most of the major projects are continuing. As Thomas and Craig said, we are taking a look at projects that are heavily development charge funded, because we're a little bit concerned that in 2020, our DC collections may not materialize as planned. And so we may have a DC revenue shortfall. And so we're looking at, are there DC funded projects that could or should be paused? And that's work that's going on as we speak. And the report that Craig talked about coming back will deal with that. Lots of work continuing remotely, planning, design, EAs, and we're working on how do we do electronic public consultation. So we've covered a number of program areas. Switching gears, POA. The Ministry of Attorney General has closed Provincial Offences Court until, I think this says at least June 1st. I think I saw something just yesterday that closure has been extended or may be extended. So that's a live issue. Court matters that were postponed have to be rescheduled. So that's some of the work that the court staff, although court's not sitting, they're doing a lot of work in terms of postponements, rescheduling, continued work on collection efforts. Number of charges entering the system is down, not surprisingly. And the other thing that's interesting, and it's happening here and in a number of program areas, is there is a working group that's looking at how do we reopen the courts and does it look different? And it may very well. How do we learn from our experience of the last 7 weeks and maybe reopen the courts with physical distancing and maybe, frankly, bringing the courts into the 21st century with a little more use of virtual technology. Council and Admin Services have done a lot of work. Successful transition to virtual committee and council meetings. We've had about 6 meetings altogether already. I think that transition's been pretty smooth. Kudos to all of council and for your adaptability and flexibility. They are working on what technology we have in place to facilitate delegations participating remotely if this extends longer. Creative Multimedia Services continues to support the organization. Bylaw enforcement has been busy. They are dealing particularly with calls related to non-essential business operations. So when those calls come to the call center and to public health, those ones particularly are triaged to our bylaw, licensing and bylaw people. So they're responding to a lot of calls there. And information management and archives continues to deal with privacy issues. Okay, on to planning. Almost all normal planning services are continuing remotely. So planning services approvals are ongoing. Our staff working really closely with area municipal staff to make sure that planning and development approvals continue. Ongoing communication with the development industry about how to keep files moving along right now. There was provision in the regulation that allowed municipalities to either continue to process applications or to kind of push pause and avoid some of the statutory timelines. I think we just continue to move forward, doing all that work remotely. Wondering about how to do virtual statutory public meetings. The ROP review process is moving forward. Councillor Galloway, I think you alluded to that earlier. And, you know, we will need to think about what have we learned and does our experience with pandemic affect the ROP review. Airport, I think you all saw the photos. This goes back, you know, 6 weeks or so. Sunwing parked a bunch of their 737s at the airport. It was a pretty interesting visual. They're still there until airlines start operating again. We took advantage of this lull in airport activity to paint the secondary runway, the markings. WestJet continues to operate at a reduced frequency, so twice a week to Calgary, dramatically reduced loads, like every other airline and every other airport. And looking ahead as we look at reopening, thinking about what changes we're going to have to make to the physical layout and policies to make sure we comply with whatever new standards exist after we reopen. Museums and libraries. So as we talked about before, you know, they are non-essential. They have been required to close. That meant about 80% of the staff in that division are on temporary layoff. Some have been redeployed, but mostly on temporary layoff. They did launch a pretty interesting project that I think Council's aware of, Help Us Make History. And so they're trying to collect either stories or artifacts so that we've got a good archive of what did this period in time, what did this history that we're making, what did it look like? They've done a lot of work online. If you want to check some of it out, if you have kids at home or friends with kids at home, there's a huge number of resources on both the library and the museum websites. Really interesting, library membership has continued to go up despite the fact that libraries are closed, and a lot of electronic circulation happening. You see some of the stats here. We've got this download library up 40%, a press reader, which gives you access to periodicals, up like 200%. So lots of people using the online resources and staff supporting that online channel. Economic development. I think you're all aware of the business and economic support team of Waterloo Region, which is co-led by Tony Lamantia from WEDC, Communitech, the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, and KW Chamber of Commerce. The four of them are co-leading Best WR. They've engaged economic development staff right across the region and all the area municipalities and are trying to be the focal point to support local businesses, both through the response phase of this and as we start working through the recovery phase to make sure that they're a strong advocacy voice. I think, Councillor Jowett, to your earlier point, and a sort of single point of information for businesses who need info. They did an interesting webinar recently, economic development and public health, communicating to businesses. Here's information that you need to know if you're operating, how to operate safely during pandemic. Smart Waterloo Region, this is a great story that I think you'll hear more about in the days to come. Worked with the school boards and a number of Smart Waterloo Region partners to help deploy internet to low-income households to support e-learning. So another great community collaboration story, and lots of economic development files continuing to move forward. A lot of info on this slide, facilities and fleet. You know, so one of the program areas that's not front-facing, but they have to do all their work so that all the other programs that I've just talked about are able to do their work. You know, so making sure that buildings and vehicles are safe. Some of the things that our facilities group has done, again, amazing collaboration across the organization, across the community. So they did a ton of work to get the overflow shelter set up at the Y, to try to get some of the daytime and daytime drop-in spaces set up. They worked really closely with Sunnyside on really short notice to set up the isolation space at Sunnyside. did physical modifications at the childcare centers to make sure that they could operate safely, and starting to look ahead, how do we start to do some of our housing unit refurbs. This is when people move in and move out of affordable housing. A lot of our facilities construction projects are continuing. Some have been paused, either for operational reasons or by contractors. And I think we communicated a little while ago to council that the CTS, the consumption and treatment site contractor, had asked to pause their work because they weren't sure they could do it safely. And I think that'll be resuming soon. ITS has been, again, sort of the hidden unsung heroes that have enabled the organization to migrate, in about a 48-hour period from on-site operation to virtual operation. Almost all the IT staff are working remotely. They get dispatched periodically to places to troubleshoot. All our IT systems continue to function, and they did just amazing work over a short period of time to make sure that all staff had the technology that they needed to work remotely. We have a service desk, a help desk. Their volumes are up because lots of people, like me included, need help when our technology is not working smoothly. We got about 1,000 staff who have technology to work from home. So just a huge amount of work. We adopted Zoom as our primary virtual meeting platform. We've got over 500 users set up on Zoom, and as it said, more than 7,000 meetings. And if you add up the number of users, we're into the tens of thousands of meeting participants since this thing started. Finance. I think you've seen a lot of the work that finance staff have done over the last 7 weeks. There's been, what do I count here? 6 reports already to committee and council. Some of them are update reports. Some of them are policy decisions that council has made about, financial support to the community, other financial matters. And there's more reports coming to council next week. There's another update report and a report with proposed extension of some of the, financial assistance matters to the community. So I think council's been really fully engaged on the financial side of this. Continuing on finance, the whole finance and corporate resources, corporate services department, most of the staff are working remotely. Some staff have to be on site. We've got stores, who are managing inventory, some of our ENIS support for checks, payroll a little bit. All our financial transactions continue to be processed. So we're paying our bills, which I think is important. When we're doing business with local businesses, they depend on the region paying our bills on time. So we're doing that. We've put in place some electronic processes, e-document signing to reduce paper flow. And you know what? Some of these things they're way more efficient. And I'm sure we're going to continue with some of these things as we come out of pandemic. Craig and his team have been working really closely with the area treasurers and the region and single tier treasurers to compare notes, see what others are doing, and try to make sure that we're working together, working collaboratively on relief programs. Procurement. This is, I just want a big shout out to procurement. I know lots of councillors have had questions about procurement, especially around personal protective equipment. You all, early on had offers from all kinds of people about, hey, I got access to 10 million masks in China, and so on. And Lisa Evans, who's our Chief Procurement Officer, has been our point person on procurement. And she has worked with a whole network of community partners, Communitech, the Lynn, hospitals. It's a very long list of community partners. And Lisa has done amazing work trying to make sure that all of our program areas always had enough PPE. One of the great stories I like is Sunnyside needed gowns, more gowns. And I don't think it says on here, I actually think Lisa went to Len's Mill store and got the materials for 500 gowns and farmed them out to a whole network of community volunteers who have sewed these gowns, where we acquired the material from Len's Mill Store. So, that's the kind of creativity that's happening right across the organization. Oh, sorry. HR, again, another department that's been critical to the success of the whole organization. Lots of advice, recommendations right across the board. How do we do screening? How do we work safely, either at work or at home? Mental health supports for staff, employee assistance for staff, all of the planning around, what staff do we need, what staff are critical, which staff aren't, who's available for redeployment, how do we manage that redeployment process. That's been a huge amount of work. It's gone amazingly smoothly. Maintaining our working relationship with our unions, as Jane talked about earlier, that's been great. Health and safety has played a key role, making sure that staff are safe and that they can do their work safely. And last bullet, we do have a report coming up probably later this month about the service review. And we have not forgot about the service review. There is work continuing on some of the service review follow-up items. Some areas have paused a little bit because of workload issues, but we're going to report to council on all of that. Service First Call Center. So this chart gives you some really up-to-date stats on calls to the call center. So what you see is mid-March, the calls to the call center more than doubled from their normal volumes. And 3/4 of the calls mid-March were COVID related. And, we staffed up rapidly so that we could respond adequately to the call volumes and rapidly set up a triage system. Which calls could the Service First Call Center deal with, and which calls got referred to public health for more in-depth follow-up. So again, just phenomenal work to ramp up capacity in a really short time and have staff be able to do it safely. Communications. I'm going to talk about both public-facing communications and also communications with council. So again, some stats, facts, and figures here. Huge amount of work by the whole communications team, corporate communications, and we've seconded communicators from all different parts of the organization to support public health and corporate communications. So we've done more than 30 COVID-related media releases, 24 media briefings. We're now into a Monday, Wednesday, Friday media briefing cycle. The website, 1.7 million page views on our website. The dashboard getting up close to 900,000 page views on that public health dashboard. And we're getting average daily page views, 50,000 page views a day. A year ago, it was 9,000 page views a day. So, the website is good, current, and people are using it. And tons of traffic on social media. Again, Twitter impressions, more than double from what it was a week ago. Huge increase in Facebook engagement. Communications with council. We've really tried to keep council abreast of all of this rapidly changing situation. I think we've had 6 committee or council meetings with open and closed updates and reports. You're getting the 3 times a week medical officer of health media briefing notes, twice weekly internal situation reports, once weekly coordinated pandemic newsletters, and then you're probably sick of email updates from me and others, but as situation changes, we try to keep you updated. So I'm going to pause. I covered a lot of ground. It's just been a huge amount of work right across the organization. So I'll pause at this point, and if there's any questions about internally, what's been happening within the organization, I'm sure there's lots of questions. And I got all of corporate leadership teams on the call, so I may turn to them to answer questions.
Thanks, Mike. That was such a comprehensive report that there only are a couple of questions. You'll be glad to hear. Now, Councillor Jowett, your dog Winnie has not registered as a delegation, so I'm not going to allow him to speak, but you do have the first question.
Oh, thanks, Elizabeth. I'm sorry you had to witness that. He stole my shortbread cookie. So, Mike, I just wanted to add to the excitement of some of the volunteerism that's come out of this. For example, in Cambridge, we started off with one mask maker, and today we marked our 30,000th mask, cloth mask. And it has the sophistication of departments: cutters, sewers, packers, and drivers. And I know that Jim Erb reached out to me, and his daughter started out a Kitchener branch. So we've seen some really good connectivity there, and I thought that was important to share some of the good news. The other thing is when you spoke to the mask making endeavors early on in this, they didn't seem to have a really good handle on infrastructure when it came to sourcing masks. And I guess, if you just happen to be one of those people that had someone call you with masks, then you got put into the fold, and they were able to create a fairly significant database to solve this problem, in my opinion, a lot earlier than they would have. So, and that was volunteer based as well before we created the infrastructure. So I just wanted to add those two little pieces to some of the sharing, because I've seen the community rise up and do all kinds of great things. My question was you're not going to believe this, but right at the beginning of your report, you spoke to childcare. And we have the two centers, and we have 150 to 200 kids in these childcare centers. Can somebody tell me, because as soon as that started, I had concerns about spread. So we have the essential workers who are very high risk in high risk environments, and we have their kids all joining each other. And so should that be of concern to our community, or have we mitigated enough risk there?
Yeah, so I won't try to go back to that slide. It would take me a while to click back.
No.
But so just a couple of comments, and then I think Douglas is on the call, and I don't know if Barb Cardo is too. So Helen, it's a really good question, and I think when the government actually directed service system managers to create emergency childcare centers, there was a lot of question about how do we comply with this provincial direction, and how do we do it safely for our staff and safely for the families? So they've put in place a huge amount of measures to make sure that the staff are safe and that the family and kids are safe. So they do active screening of basically anybody who's in the facility. So staff are actively screened. I think the kids are actively screened. I think there's sort of curbside pick up and drop off to try to minimize the number of people who are actually in the space. So those are a few things that I know have gone on. And I don't know if Douglas or Barb can add any more detail.
Yeah, I'm here, Mike. My camera's not on because it seems to be doing something weird. The other thing that was done, the requirements that were put in place around opening these emergency childcare centers were greatly enhanced from what is required of the normal day-to-day operations that we run. So cleaning and sanitizing were greatly enhanced, and so we can pretty much guarantee that the place is clean, and with the active screening, there's nobody getting in or out who has any kind of symptoms.
I hope that helps.
Well, just one quick probe question to Douglas then. So Douglas, what about those that might be asymptomatic? I guess that's the unfortunate part of this, is that we can't manage every single risk.
I think you can't manage every single risk, and we've been in the business now for a couple of weeks, and we haven't had anybody go from asymptomatic to symptomatic that we're aware of.
Thanks. I'm really glad to hear that, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, and Councillor Jowett, thanks for the question. I think it's examples like these emergency childcare centers and some of our programs that have continued to operate that are going to give us the models for how we reopen some other things, right? So, reopening childcare. Like, we've actually operated childcare centers in the midst of pandemic safely. So that gives us some lessons learned for how we, scale that up and reopen childcare centers, just for example.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Jowett stole my thunder on Cambridge mask makers, and thank you for acknowledging that. And I think it's actually going to be an industry that carries on for a while as we look at trying to mask all of our public, because I do believe fully that that will help us to prevent or slow down a second wave or community transmission. But I did want to paint a picture for the public that may be listening about the tremendous amount of education for the measures that are being taken that has to be supplied by everyone dealing with individuals, patients, families, staff, and the public through Sunnyside and the daycare centers. Although we say that we've put these measures in place, behind each one of those measures, here's how to wash your hand, here's how to apply, DAW for Dawn PPE, here's what PPE actually means. It is a tremendous amount of work for those that are working in these sectors in order to provide effective education. And I just wanted to acknowledge that I think we have been very well served by all staff, by all sectors across this region in preparing and then implementing this plan. I couldn't be more proud. And I would acknowledge that across the province, I think Waterloo region is well ahead of some other municipalities in doing the coordination and the collaboration that has been done here in the region. The only question that I would just ask was, I know that there's been work going on to provide some day programming in Cambridge for homeless and street involved persons. And I'm wondering if Douglas could just provide an update and whether he has in his crystal ball an idea of when we may be opening these services in Cambridge. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Catherine. I'm not seeing Ryan Pettipier on the call right now, and he would have the most up-to-date information on it. Some of the difficulty that we've had is finding locations. We had some earlier on in Cambridge that we thought might be of use, but have since been eliminated as possibilities. So as far as I can tell at the moment, location is the issue. We can probably manage the staffing, given that the cities and the region have redeployed staff that have staff who've received layoff notices. We can probably find enough staff. The issue at the moment is location, and we're having a great deal of difficulty finding a location in Cambridge.
I'm seeing that Ryan does appear to be here somewhere. I'm wondering whether he's able to.
Oh, yeah, he's there. Ryan, do you want to chime in on that one?
Sure. Thanks, Douglas, and through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Douglas is correct. I'm optimistic that we're about a week away, probably from getting something up and operating in Cambridge. Part of it is the space. Part of it, as Douglas said, is the staff. Staff is the real challenge in coordinating, even with redeployments. We're getting the Kitchener space open as of today, and I feel like we're about a week behind in Cambridge, but actively working on it in parallel. I hope that I would have some good news to share on that front within the next week.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate it. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Galloway.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My question is really to do with waste management situations. So thanks for getting the transfer stations open, because there was concern in the community, as you all know, about that. Now there may be a little bit of a concern that we're charging people for taking out large items that they otherwise would have been able to put out at the curb. And I did explore this only in part with Mr. Schmidt yesterday, but I'm wondering whether or not there is any practical way of dealing with that at the gatehouse, where the attendant could determine whether or not a charge would be levied or not if they were large items that would otherwise have been put out to curb, which people are saying, you know, we pay our taxes to have picked up, or whether or not that would be really quite impossible to implement.
And maybe I'll ask Thomas if he can respond. And the other comment I would make before Thomas responds is, you know, I guess one question to people would be, what's urgent and time sensitive? And, you know, anything that's not urgent and essential, you know, can people just hang on to it? And, you know, normal service will return at some point.
Well, I think what happened this past weekend, there was, you know, it's the end of the month. People were moving, and they had surplus furniture, and they would normally put it at the curb. In some cases, these are landlords. In some cases, they're tenants, but they had to take it out to the transfer station, which is now open, of course. But they would otherwise be able to get rid of it without that effort. And without any expense, although I do appreciate, as you indicated earlier, Mike, that the volume of garbage and recycling is up significantly. So our contractor is under a lot of pressure. And one of the reasons why, in addition to, you know, the safety considerations of large pickup, one of the reasons why we're not pushing them too hard to get that going again. It may not be possible or practical to be able to do this, but I'm wondering if Thomas has a comment.
Through you, Madam Chair, on the charging for just some items is pretty difficult for the staff at the front gate to determine which items to charge for and which not. And I think that would put a lot of stress and be difficult for staff. Like if they charge someone and don't charge someone else, I think that would be difficult. If we wanted to implement a free drop-off, we could do that. I think our concern in doing that is exactly as Mr. Murray has said. We're asking people to bring things that they have to bring. We are still in a situation of having physical distancing. We are still trying to keep people safe, and reduce it or removing the charge could result in more people coming to the landfill site and it being busier. And it is kind of the opposite direction we're trying to go with keeping people distanced. But I mean, yeah, I think our alternatives, I don't think a partial alternative is very feasible. It's just very difficult to decide what to charge for or not. And if we remove the fee, I think it's really the risk that we will get even more people coming, and basically we're trying to keep distance.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised by that, but I think yesterday's traffic, 1,200 vehicles at the transfer station yesterday, is an indication of maybe some pent-up demand because of large item pickup not being available. Also, people are doing a lot of home rentals right now because a lot of people are home. So it's just, I guess, an issue that we'll have to continue to monitor.
Yep. Councillor Verbanovic. Seems to be muted.
Not hearing you.
Here we go. I lost my controls, but anyway, just wanted to follow up on the piece pertaining to the work that Douglas's groups, in particular Ryan and his team, have been doing around the shelter system, and really want to compliment the fantastic job that has been done over the last while to get us to this point where people are being accommodated, where we've implemented daytime programming and so on. Initially when we opened up in the new facilities, there were some issues that were spilling out into the surrounding neighborhood.
Yep.
And I think working with our partners at WRPS, we were able to deal with those at both locations. And my understanding now is that you know, whether we're talking in the downtown or either of the two new locations, things are better than ever. And I think some of this speaks to the work that's being done, not just in terms of an overnight shelter perspective, but also in terms of daytime programming with the street involved population that those facilities support. And I think it does give us something to consider as we go forward in terms of, you know, how could or should we be doing things better in terms of working with this population so that we ultimately have I think a more inclusive and welcoming community for everyone. So real kudos to all the staff. And I think as we start looking at recovery planning, this is going to be an important chunk of work for us to focus on. Thank you.
All right. I see no more questions. So back at you, Mike.
Okay, yeah, and the next couple sections are, you'll be happy to know, are a little bit shorter, actually quite a bit shorter than one we just dealt with. So what I just gave you was, you know, all the work that's going on within this organization to manage our operations and, you know, reports to council around staffing, financial impacts on this organization. So in addition to all that internal management work, you know, we've alluded a number of times to the coordinated community response that is underway. And, you know, that many people within this organization, in addition to their internal management work, are also playing a significant role in the coordinated community response. So you've seen a version of this. You saw a version of this on March 11th, just as our world was changing. And so this gives you a kind of a graphic view of the coordinated pandemic response structure. This is based on the Community Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Plan, CPIP, that was prepared, seems like a lifetime ago, but that has served as a starting point, a blueprint, a roadmap for our local coordinated response. So, you know, there is a regional pandemic control group, and then the real work is being done in 5 sector groups: health sector, community support sector, municipal sector, critical infrastructure sector, and communications. And I really want to emphasize that the function, the role of the pandemic control group is, so, you know, the name may be a misnomer, control group. It really is serving a liaison and coordination function between the region, the area municipalities, and frankly, dozens of community partners who are working together to try to provide a seamless pandemic response to the community. So it really does play that liaison role, coordination role, and then decisions are the responsibility of individual organizations. So decisions that the region needs to make are the responsibility either of regional council, if they're council type decisions, or the regional chair, if there are emergency time sensitive decisions, or our corporate leadership team, if they are operational type decisions. And then the same is true of area municipalities. You know, they have decisions to make. So, you know, just a couple of recent examples, all the staffing issues. Each municipality has dealt with that slightly differently, but in a relatively coordinated way. Financial assistance to local businesses and residents. Again, regional council made decisions about that. Each local council did, but those decisions were informed by a lot of good collaboration behind the scenes. So I just really want to reinforce that. And then at the top, you know, we've talked about the provincial and federal directives that are coming down on the region, area municipalities, and every other organization in the community involved in the response. So I'm going to just talk briefly about each of those sector groups. I actually won't get into the health sector group. Dr. Wong, I think, covered that really well earlier in her presentation, so I won't repeat what she said. Other than, I just want to reiterate just a huge thank you to all of the health professionals, our public health staff, acute care, hospitals, primary care, non-hospital care. The collaborative work that's gone on in the health sector is exemplary. Community supports group, again, we've talked about some of that work. That group is chaired by Douglas Bartholomew Saunders. There are dozens of community partners. I think Douglas chairs frequent Zoom calls that have somewhere between 40 and 60 participants, which gives you a sense of how many community organizations are trying to work together on a seamless response, especially for marginalized people in our community. And so I think there are 5 different working groups under that community supports umbrella. One group working on food services, I think that's led by the Food Bank of Waterloo Region. And just some numbers here, 1,800 plus food hampers, 10,000 plus meals provided weekly. It's phenomenal. Housing and homelessness, we've talked about all the work on shelters that have gone on. There's a group focused on psychosocial and spiritual supports, the whole emotional and psychological impact of the pandemic. And again, dozens of community partners working together to say, how can we provide the psychosocial supports that the community needs? Children's services, a lot of focus on emergency childcare, but also more recently focus on children at risk, and a concern that with schools being closed, childcare centers being closed, there may be underreporting of kids at risk. And so some social media work and work by many organizations to try to make sure we're looking after kids at risk. And animal care. So there's a temporary shelter for pets if people need to give them up for a little while. And one of the, I think, great thing, pet food bank, which I guess is also being well used. So critical infrastructure group, Thomas Schmidt chairs that. It includes reps from all the area municipal public works areas, hydro and gas utilities, telecommunications utilities, GRCA, and there may be 1 or 2 others. And so they are working hard to coordinate all of the critical infrastructure work, make sure that critical infrastructure continues to be operated, maintained, available, and coordination on capital projects. Make sure that we're all proceeding in an integrated way. Excuse me. Communications group, we talked earlier about just some of the communication stats, both internal communications with council and our organization, and external communication. The communications group has staff from the region, I think all the area municipalities, hospitals, post-secondary institutions. Oh, I missed school boards. Sorry, all the school boards are represented. Police are on it. The business and economic support team of Waterloo Region has a rep on it. And their primary role has been to share information so that all the communications leads from all these organizations have the same information, and that they can coordinate and amplify communications and key messages. And they've been doing that really effectively through conventional media and social media. Municipal sector group is chaired by Dan Chapman. He's the CAO in Kitchener. That includes myself and all the area municipal CAOs. And again, largely a coordination function. There are dozens and dozens of issues that have come up where we've talked about, what are the options for each of our organizations? What are our preferences? And how do we try to stay as coordinated and aligned as we can and bring, recommendations to our respective councils that are, hopefully aligned and coordinated. So some examples, early on it was facility closures and trying to stay in sync around facility closures. For the area municipalities, parks and rec closures, Victoria Day fireworks has been a recent issue, and a very recent issue, community gardens, and how to facilitate the reopening of community gardens, which is happening very successfully, like as we speak. And we are starting discussions now about recovery planning and how do we do reopening and recovery in as coordinated way as we can, because our public accesses area municipal facilities and regional facilities, and we need to have some consistency between what they see in regional and area municipal facilities and our staff and our unions talk. And so we need to have some consistency in terms of how we're dealing with our staff. So that's an overview of the coordinated community response that's going on. And so again, I'll pause there and try to answer any questions before we dive into the short last part of the presentation.
You're getting a break, Mike. I see no questions at all. So
Okay.
carry on.
People are getting tired. I'm losing my voice. Okay. So last section, recovery and reopening considerations. Some of you may have seen this because I forwarded to council a week or so ago the provincial framework for reopening the province. So they called it a framework. They said it was a roadmap, not a calendar. And if any of you have looked at it, it's a bit vague. But it is providing a roadmap to reopening. So I just I've pulled a couple of sections from it. So one of the things they've talked about is what criteria will the Chief Medical Officer of Health and the provincial government use to decide when to start easing up on restrictions and start reopening the province. And so they've talked about looking at criteria in 4 different areas: virus spread and containment, health system capacity, public health system capacity, and our ability to track cases and incidents. Some specifics that they've said they will look at to help inform their decisions about reopening. They want to see a consistent 2 to 4 week decrease in number of new cases. We're not there yet. They want to see a decrease in cases that cannot be traced to a source. They want to see a decrease in number of new cases in hospital. And they want to see the capacity in public health to reach approximately 90% of new COVID contacts within a day. And that, we are not there. That's going to take a fair amount of public health capacity to do case and contact management within 24 hours. So that's the criteria they've said they're going to use. And this is also just taken directly from their framework. They've said, okay, once those conditions are satisfied, the province will undertake a gradual and staged approach to reopening. And so they've talked about 3 stages, very vague, very broad. I think we're actually into stage 1. They allowed some businesses to reopen as of yesterday. Garden centers for curbside pickup, marinas to get boats prepared. So we're starting to see the first parts of stage 1. And what they've talked about is between each stage, or each stage lasting 2 to 4 weeks, to allow them to monitor the impact that reopening is having. So it's going to be staged, it's going to be gradual, there's going to be pauses between the stages. Trying to read between the lines, our speculation is, reopening for some of the region's programs and services will start to happen in stage 2, and some perhaps not until stage 3. But again, we'll have to await provincial directives and guidance. So some of the considerations that we're working on, we're working with our partners, area municipalities and others, things we're thinking about, and for council to think about, we will have to continue to comply with provincial directives. They have been directive, and I think they're going to continue to be. So they'll set the rules, we'll have to follow them. We will need to make sure we can create a safe environment for regional staff and for our customers and clients. And that is going to look different in each of our different program areas. I believe that some of the key elements of safety will continue to be physical distancing and hygiene, likely mask wearing will be elements that we're probably going to see. We will probably need some physical modifications to some of our spaces, buildings, offices, and probably some changes to policy, how we interact with people. That's within our organization and within our own programs and services. And then there's a whole question about how do we continue this integrated, coordinated approach within the community as we migrate from the response phase into the recovery phase. And so there's lots of discussion going on now between the region, area municipalities, other community partners about how do we do this in a coordinated way? You know, how do we help rebuild the community, both the business sector, the economy, the community support sector. And so I can just tell you there's active discussion going on within this organization, with the area municipalities, and with like dozens of community partners about how do we work together on this so that it happens efficiently and effectively and in a coordinated way. And that is going to require frequent updates for council as we navigate our way through it. And several people have said, you know, it's possible that the reopening is going to be more challenging than shutting things down. And I think that's going to be the case. So that brings me to the end of a lengthy presentation. So thanks so much for your patience, and I hope it was helpful.
Thanks, Mike. Very, very good. I think that although I read every one of those updates that I get every single day, it is really helpful to see everything out at once. I think it gives us some, I don't know, it's helpful for me. We have a question from Councillor Strickland.
Thank you very much, Chair Clarke, and thanks to you, Mike, for a very comprehensive overview of everything that's going on at the region and the great work that everyone's doing there. And if I can maybe just distinguish between the public health considerations and the operational considerations in terms of my comments and questions. I guess from the public health side, I'm really buoyed by the fact that Dr. Wong's presentation is indicating that our community spread is slowing down. We obviously have much challenges still ahead of us in long-term care and retirement homes, and we're focusing our resources in that area, which I think is appropriate and is very much needed to help those people and those workers who are working in that sector and are trying to overcome some very difficult challenges. So when I move into operations, my question is with respect to our state of emergency at the region. And I recognize that we have really done what we can. We're not out of the woods yet. We've contained the spread. We are seeing some improvements. And I'm just wondering about the state of emergency at the region and when will that be lifted? And I think one of the reasons why I would like to see a plan for that, you didn't touch on it in your presentation, is that I think it's important as we move into recovery and reopening considerations that we do more than have reopening considerations. We have a plan for reopening. And I think it's important to have council input on that. And I know all the working groups are doing everything they can and the decisions are being made under the guise of a state of emergency. But I think it's important to put some of these decisions back into the hands of council. So my question is, when will this state of emergency be lifted, and when will we see council have more involvement in making some of these decisions going forward? And the caveat is, this is not a criticism of the good work that's been done to date, not at all. This is just trying to get more input from council as we move forward into the next stage of managing the pandemic, which to me is about opening and recovering our society and our economy. And I think elected voices need to be at that table.
Yep. Yeah, fair enough. So I can tell you, lots of active work going on right now to create that reopening plan, and we will bring that back to council, like as soon as it's in a state, to share with council. And I think part of that, Councillor Strickland, make a really good point. Part of that plan needs to be what criteria would we use to lift the state of emergency, lift the regional declaration of emergency. And I don't think we have that answer yet, but I think that needs to be part of the plan. So we will do that.
Okay, and I'd like to see that you know, like sooner rather than later. You know, you alluded to the province and moving through different phases of reopening, and there's expectations that there's going to be more announcements this week and additional announcements next week as well in terms of different services being opened. If the curve continues to be flattened and we don't see any really uptake in new cases, so I think it's important, Mike, and to staff, that I know you're doing a lot to manage the pandemic, but we need, and if it's a separate group, you know, a separate kind of dedicated resources to dealing with this issue. I know the province, for example, has created a committee. I know the City of Toronto has named 2 senior people to lead the reopening discussion and planning that going forward. If we need to provide that kind of resource and that kind of thinking, I think it needs some dedicated thinking and some dedicated resources to get the state of emergency lifted, get more of council involved in some of these decisions, and help pave the way for reopening. And further to that, I'm also wondering, and you can help me understand a little bit more, why we are linking the closing of our services to schools. And, you know, schools are closed to May 31st. We're closed till May 31st. And I know we have some directives in there where museums and libraries can't open, but why are we linking our decision-making on reopening to when schools are being reopened?
Yeah, and so if I could, maybe I'll just go. Well, I was going to go back to this, if I could. No, why won't it let me go backwards? No, that's not working very well. Never mind. I was going to go back to those provincial slides. So, you know, we had extended our facility closures to May the 4th. It was, I think, apparent to everybody that, you know, opening on May the 4th was not on. And so we needed to advise both the public and our staff, when were we going to extend those closures to? You know, I think May 31st in some way was a handy date because it coincided with provincial school closures. The thought process behind it, though, was way more related to those 2 slides that I put up. What criteria was the province looking at before they would lift restrictions? So, you know, if I could go back to that slide, you know, those criteria about, you know, cases going down, public health capacity, lower cases in hospital. So we looked at that and said, before, yeah, thank you. Before they would start to lift restrictions, these are some of the criteria that they wanted to see met. And then they said, Terry, can you go to the next slide? Somebody has taken my ability to advance slides away. Yeah, so that's the criteria. And then here's the roadmap. And looking at this, our belief was we were likely in stage 2 and stage 3. So when we put all that together, we said, we're probably, you know, a couple weeks away from them lifting restrictions, and then they're in a 2 to 4 week per stage. So we looked at that and said, it's unlikely that much before May 31st, are we going to get to a point of reopening to the public? And I want to reemphasize to the public, because there's lots that can and will happen in the background. And if we're able to start incrementally bringing staff back to do work in regional facilities, then we're going to do that. So that, our Councillor Strickland, to your point, you know, that's really where May 31st came from, was saying it's likely going to be about a month before we think we're able to open to the public. And then some specific facilities, childcare, I think the province is going to be directive when childcare centers can reopen, and museums and libraries, other cultural facilities, I think they're going to be equally directive about when those can reopen. And my speculation on museums and libraries, it's probably stage 3. So we take your point, and I don't think we're, automatically tied to school closures. I think more we're looking at what's going to be realistic in terms of provincial guidance.
Okay, so that helps me understand a little bit more. So I'm clear. Basically, May 31st then is a planning date, and depending how quickly the province moves through that reopening kind of work chart, we may be able to, for example, open up some of our services or our buildings sooner than May 31st if the province deems that it's appropriate and with the appropriate health and safety measures to do so. So if they said, for example, that museums can open the week of May 18th, then we would operationalize that even though we've indicated May 31st.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So that helps me understand that. So then just to follow up and just to finally, my final comment is that, this is all in the spirit of moving through this pandemic and really starting to dedicate some resources on how we open up our services and open up our economy, open up our community, and start to really think about that in terms of putting together a plan. Pandemic, we're still not quite out of the woods yet. We have encouraging news there, but we need to give people hope. We need to provide a roadmap to our community on how we're seeing through this pandemic, keeping health considerations in mind, and how we're gradually going to start opening up our services. And I think people really need that. And I would encourage my colleagues on council from lower tier municipalities to also think about opening up the parks and opening up the playgrounds, also to allow people and respect that people, I think, are responding very well to social distancing and putting in place the right kind of measures. But we need to start thinking about a real identifiable plan and how we're going to start opening up our municipalities again with the right kinds of health and safety measures put in place. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Clarke. I just wanted to agree in a large part with a lot of the things Councillor Strickland said, and I do think we have to give people hope, but I also think people are looking for some stability and some targets, and as much as May 31st may seem a far way off, I think it's far better to give people something that's predictable and hopefully achievable. And just to point out, there's actually two things going on. We've talked about the directives and the guidance that we're getting from the province, but the province declared a state of emergency on March 17th. The region declared and the area municipalities on the 25th. So they are related and one sort of overarches the other, but they're not precisely the same thing. And before the region declared a state of emergency, we had a very vigorous debate and input from all of regional council. And I would assume that that is how we will come out of COVID-19 and out of a state of emergency, is with a debate by all of regional council. But I also think that if you move too quickly, and I'm not inferring that Councillor Strickland was saying that, ratcheting those restrictions back, I think, will be much harder on our community and much harder to police, control, and educate. So I really do think that moving forward and doing it in an incremental way is absolutely fundamental to being successful, and knowing when the time, when the risk is much lower for moving forward. And again, the province, those directives are ones, they're not nice to follow. We have to follow them. So there are some governors on how quickly we can move.
Councillor Lorentz.
You did today. It's hard enough chairing meetings without having to deal with the Zoom part of it. So thank you. I don't want to echo Councillor Strickland's comments, but I certainly agree with all of them. And I know that it's been hard to keep the directly elected people in the loop because I feel in some cases that I was not in the loop and was not part of the decision-making process, or at least the operational part. And I'll let my other colleagues that are directly elected speak to that. But I really do hope that we've turned the corner and that we'll now have the ability to move forward. I think people are in the community are looking for direction from this council. And I certainly hope that we have the skills and the knowledge and the opportunity to be able to pass that on. I guess I'll just leave it at that. But I know everybody's been working really hard, and I appreciate the mayors and the local CAOs that sit on the Regional Pandemic Control Group. All the information and the coordination that's gone in has been amazing. But I just, to be honest, as a directly elected official representing the city of Kitchener, I really did feel out of the loop. And I've made that point quite clearly to you, Chair Redmond, and also I had a great conversation with Mike yesterday. And so I'd like to be able to put that behind us and move forward as a team. I think that's really important that we do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kiefer.
Well, thank you. And I got a couple of things. I do agree with Councillor Strickland on what he said. And I think it's vital and very important that we come up with some sort of a plan or framework. I don't think there's anybody on this council that wants to disregard guidance or directions from the province or the health people. I mean, that is so important. We all know that. However, moving forward, I think it's critical that we do come up with some sort of a plan, because as I see it right now, we don't have a plan, and we're kind of sitting in the waiting. And then when I'm talking about a plan, I'm talking about for us here in the region. The other thing that I want to make clear or would like to comment on is Councillor Lorentz bringing up the directly elected officials. I for one, feel the same way. I think this Regional Pandemic Control Group, it says Regional Pandemic Control Group. Well, as a regional councillor, I should be sitting on that, and so should all the directly elected officials. So I'm hoping that we can come to some sort of an agreement moving forward. And I think when this pandemic group was put together, I think it's probably an old group that was put together at some point. I'm not talking about the individuals that are in it now, but before when it was put together. So I'd like to see that happen if I could, but it's so important. I know this is such a complex situation when we're in an emergency, but that's how I feel. Thank you.
Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, and through the chair. I think we need to start to plan, but I think what I'm thinking about is totally different from what everybody else is thinking. My group, my EOC, my Emergency Operations Center for the township, we've been working on this for 3 weeks now. And what we're doing is saying, okay, we're going to try and bring back 30% of the staff by May 24. And in that, it's going to be a test where we bring in, they have to have not gowns, they have to have gloves, they have to have masks, they have to have minimum distancing. The province still says 5 people in the building per, for the public. How do we make that happen? We're making the mind. We have to get on the list and get organized and say, if we're going to implement this, how do we implement it? Because the regulations, I think, are going to stay in for some extent. I think they're going to stay in for the whole summer, at least. And but they're going to say, okay, maybe we'll go from 5 people to 10 people. You got to regulate 10 people coming into your library. You still have to maintain the minimum distance standards. You still have to have protection for your staff, hand washing stations, antibacterial gel. And we've got to get those things in order. We still have, although, they've been trying really hard to get stuff for the region and for the emergency services and that, there's still shortages. The EMS got a hold of us, and I put them in charge of it towards a church who's doing gowns because EMS has run out of gowns. So we still have to get supplies and get ready for this. But if we say, okay, we're going to open in 2 weeks, we're not ready. So I think Councillor Strickland, when he said getting a committee together, I think he's right. And I think the committee should probably get together to look at the dynamics of how we open and then what ones we're going to do first. So just wanted to give you a heads up on what I thought about that.
Yeah, and if I could just comment, Councillor Foxton, there's dozens, hundreds of detailed operational issues that staff are working on right now. So rest assured, we got, a whole team of people, and, think about that presentation I went through, and think about the different regional operations that we have, and each one is going to need slightly different approaches to reopening and doing that so that it's safe for staff and safe for our customers and clients. So that work is happening right across the organization, and when it's ready, we'll bring it to council for council's information.
Councillor Jowett.
Thank you, Chair Clarke. So yes, I have to vet in with my directly elected official colleagues. I feel like I was out of the loop. I found it hard to give people reassurances, and I think I'm somebody who can do that. I found it offensive that we named information because people couldn't handle the skews. I think people are a lot smarter than we realize they are, and it's our job to help them understand that. So what I did see was a bit of incongruency. We fanned out to all kinds of task force people, committees, and groups to assimilate information, and we were not there. It almost felt like we cannot call ourselves collaborative if we are exclusive. And the only people who enjoy exclusivity are those that are included. And in order for us to have a good dynamic around our table, we have to be a little bit more clear about these kinds of expectations. That's all I wanted to add to it.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Okay, well, thank you. And again, kudos to all of our staff and all regional officials, including municipal, lower tier officials in the pandemic control group. I guess on that, no doubt there'll be, after this is all over, hopefully a review of that control group. And obviously things have changed since the last time it was put together. There's no doubt we were lucky to have at least a working document or something to go with rather than starting from scratch. I know the record covered that this weekend. It was good to see some of our local officials that have stepped up and led the way on that. Obviously, as a directly elected member of council, I had numerous questions throughout, and although I really appreciated the situation report that our CAO did send out to us, there may be an opportunity for a member of the directly elected folks to be included. Perhaps, God forbid that we need this control group in the future, but that could be just a suggestion that you include going forward. With regards to the May 31st and directly linking it with the reopening of the schools, I obviously shared my concern with that as well, and the fact that, as this evolves and we hopefully flatten the curve, and with the province potentially, updating folks on the May the 6th order and even the emergency order on May the 12th, that we can, similarly as to how we started this, give a 2-week rolling kind of update, and that we may be able to open up services, especially, ones I think the public have been waiting for prior to May 31st. I'm not going to link the two, but, I recall back in the day we had the cold weather events where we closed the schools because the temperatures dropped below 40, and the school board decided to close their administration office. I mean, there was an outcry on this because obviously kids, unfortunately, may not always be able to properly clothe themselves for the cold weather, but I would expect that, adults are able to do so. And I guess I'm drawing that parallel that if anybody is ready to go and have the resources to prepare and the means to prepare a back to work scenario, it should be the local government. There are ample essential workplaces out there now that have been running safely for the last 30 or so days, and we can't have this private public sector divide. If the private sector can do it, then so should the public. And so I know that you've got staff working behind the scenes to create that roadmap to when we get back. But I think a lot of people would expect that our local government, being that they have those resources, put those in place and evolve, I suppose, and react to the province if they announce tomorrow, for instance, that the order has been lifted in another block of things. So I guess that's where I want to leave off. Again, on the directly elected piece, the fact that this pandemic control group perhaps may consider involvement from some of the directly elected officials to just level out the representation on its groups. So that's all I have for now. Thank you again, and we'll go from there.
Councillor Galloway.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I could chime in on this as well. I do share some of the concerns that some of the directly elected have expressed. And I think a future iteration, if ever needed, or when a review of the plan is conducted, that should probably be taken into account. There are some workarounds that people can do, of course, and I have done on a number of occasions through the pandemic and the crisis, in terms of using the telephone or email or whatever to get answers to particular questions that I need to respond to. But something I don't think anybody has talked about, but also something that should be given some consideration again in a future context, is what is the role of the Board of Health in all this? And council is the Board of Health, so that's one and the same thing, except that there are some different responsibilities that are given to the Board of Health, and I think that's something that we might need better understanding on, and whether or not that gets built into the pandemic plan, if appropriate, is I think something that needs to be considered as well.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions. I do have one, and it's just a technical one. Further to Chair Redmond's comments about our regional declaration of emergency, the province's decisions will be made based on the provincial public health data. Where do and how does our public health data figure in? The province's decisions seem to be, made without reference to local municipalities' data, but does that have an impact on our local declaration of emergency? Do you see these things interacting at all?
So maybe I'll make a comment, and then, Shuli or Chair Redmond might want to chime in. I think, we're going to, as I said, as part of the reopening plan, one of the things that we have to turn our mind to is what criteria would we use for lifting the state of regional emergency? And so go back to, why did we declare it in the first place? We declared it in the first place to give the region the ability to act quickly and make local emergency orders if the need arose. So that was the fundamental and primary reason for declaring a state of emergency. And also at the time, it sent a very clear message, right? So I think there was a communications reason and there was a practical reason. And so those are some factors that we'll have to think about for when we rescind it. When we rescind it, it's going to send a communications message. Oh, the emergency is over, right? So we got to be very careful about when we send that message. And it also then takes away our ability, our authority to make local orders and do it quickly. And so, again, I think both those things we have to think through very carefully. As we work through the reopening phase, if the province is giving us latitude and flexibility, it's possible that we may need to make orders if things aren't proceeding in a smooth way. And so I think we would want to make sure we have that ability to continue to do that. So that's what would be, in my mind, as the CAO, considerations. I don't know, Dr. Wong, if, there'd be other considerations as well, or Chair Redmond.
Do you want to go, Chair?
Oh, go ahead, Shuli. I'll finish up.
At this point, I don't see any information that would say to me that we're likely going to go down a different path than the broad framework that's been laid out by the province. broadly speaking, what the province is saying in terms of the overall trends is similar to what we're saying, which is community spread has slowed down, but there's still a lot of activity in long-term care home and retirement homes. So we are tracking roughly like the province overall.
And just to add to that, Elizabeth, I think it's a really good question. And I think it is really important to look at these sort of two parallel tracks that we're on. And you look at the beaches in Miami and the fact that people flooded, they did not continue to respect physical distancing. They did not sort of do the good behaviors. I'm assuming that as we come out of this, the same sort of regulatory system will be inspections by public health. It will be bylaw officers of both the region and area municipalities. So the area municipalities in the region all declared it at the same time. So we all had the ability for those special orders, as well as Waterloo Regional Police. So as we come out of this, I think we are going to have to continue to monitor. I really do subscribe to it being gradual, and I respect the opinions some councillors have given that maybe the public sector may be ahead of us, or we may be on par. But one of the reasons there's all of those calls going into Waterloo Regional number, the 519-575-4400 line, is people are worried that other people aren't complying, or sometimes you get employees that are worried and they want to know where to go. Those processes and that protocol still needs to be in place as we come out of this. So I don't know that it's an automatic that we will necessarily be lockstep with the province, because we may need the ability to have those special orders after the fact. But I think it's worth thinking about. It's worth having a debate. But I think that we have to be cautious as we move forward and plan.
Just as a follow-up, and I see that Councillor McGarry has a question, and just for my own clarity, hypothetically, if the province says, we've seen a decline in new cases consistently over the last 2 to 4 weeks, but we haven't seen that decline yet, whether it's because of our expanded testing or for whatever other reason, hypothetically, we might consider extending our state of emergency type restrictions. Am I correct?
Yeah, I always prefer not to answer hypothetical.
That's politics 101, Elizabeth. You know that.
I've learned this.
All right, we would be rather than hypothetically. I'll rephrase that. We would be legally entitled to.
Absolutely.
All right.
We have the tools. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor McGarry.
Thank you. I really appreciate the discussion. Of course, my background is medicine and healthcare. And I just want to reiterate the seriousness of the virus. And although we're still seeing numbers going down at some point, those numbers still represent individuals and families who are experiencing death and severe illness. We don't know the long-term effects of some of the severely impacted patients from this disease, and from some of the reports coming from around the world that are experiencing this, it's not always a good news story that somebody recovers and they're fully recovered. I'll give you a quick example, which takes me back to the Walkerton situation and some of the damage from that particular bacterial infection that was lifelong to those that lost their kidney function and ended up in a lifetime of dialysis and organ donation. Now, it's not the same here, but what I'm just trying to do is sort of exert some caution about the fact that we all want to get back to a normal life, but at what risk? I know that there are some council members there are in this region who do not want to come out of self-isolation due to a health risk or age, or the fact that they have family members at risk. I don't want to rush this in order to then backtrack or cause any more illness in the community than possible. I know we have public safety uppermost in the mind, but I just want to put some caution out there that although numbers may start to go down, those individuals and their family members are still ill. And I want to make sure that we have everything in place possible, including a safe supply of secure PPE for all of the businesses and individuals, healthcare facilities and beyond that need them ahead of making sure that we open up slowly. So that's really just my caution.
Thank you. Councillor Strickland.
Thank you. I appreciate Councillor McGarry's comments. And I guess, you know, the evidence is, and I understand where people are coming from. We're talking about a very serious and sometimes deadly virus. But the evidence is community spread slowing. It's focused more on long-term care. The surge at the hospitals has not occurred to the extent that it was possibly planned to. So mission's not accomplished yet. We've done a pretty darn good job. But we also have to recognize that the lockdown has detrimental health effects in a variety of other areas. Businesses are going bankrupt. People can't pay rent. There's all kinds of social determinants to health. And this is the risk that we have to manage. And that is why I bring this forward in terms of what is the plan for us to open. I'm not saying open tomorrow, but we need a plan to lift the state of the emergency, a plan to get things going again so we can give people hope, and also recognize the other social determinants of health, which include, you know, bankruptcy, stress, mental illness, domestic violence. These are all factors we have to raise and have to consider. You know, it's you know, for some of us, the impact economically has not been that great because of where we are in our careers, the education that we have, our ability to have Zoom meetings. But there's countless others, and I would say across our community, tens of thousands of others who haven't been able to deal with this pandemic the same way that we have. And yes, we have to protect their health, but we also have to manage all the other risks that come with this. And that's why I'm continuing to emphasize we need a plan on how to open things up here in the region of Waterloo and give our community hope on when this state of emergency will be lifted.
Thank you, Councillor Strickland. That's those are good words. I see no other questions. All I see is a big black Councillor Strickland page for some reason. And I think then, Mr. Murray, we're done on the update?
All done. Yep.
We're done. All right, then. Our next meeting is May 26th, 2020. That's the next Committee of the Whole meeting. We will be going into a licensing committee meeting shortly, but first we will have a couple of closed meetings coming up this week. And so I need motion that a closed meeting of council be held on Wednesday, May 6th, 2020 and Friday, May 8th, 2020 electronically in accordance with Section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 for the purpose of considering the following subject matters: personal matters about identifiable individuals and labor relations. So I have a motion by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Erb, and please use the yes or no vote buttons to vote. I think I saw a hand. We're good? Okay, and that's carried unanimously. We will now call to adjourn the meeting, moved by Councillor Jowett and seconded by Councillor Dworsky. Call vote. And that is carried. We do have a licensing and hearings committee meeting. We're going to take a 10-minute break, but please stay in the room. I understand an email went out giving those instructions, but because I'm busy chairing, I'm not checking my emails. So 10-minute break, and we do have some people who've been waiting very patiently in the waiting room, so we'd like to pick it up as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Just a